Prologue. The Grey Wolf sat atop the hill with a perfect view of the land before him. A vast area covered with rotting buildings, debris, and the new growth of trees. The area provided a perfect hiding ground for the ever-fearful humans. With so many buildings to hide in and an underground sewer system, the stench of the town was a somewhat perfect place to hide the human scent. However, with the light of the moon beckoning down on him, he felt the beast inside awakening and his senses sharpening to its full power. With one last look at the land, he raised his regal head to the moon. With his muzzle in the air, he let out a mighty howl. One by one, his companions howled up at the sky in response to his outcry, signaling the beginning of the hunt. They were going to find this hidden human village, even if it was the last thing they did. No human would be left to roam his lands unattended. They would capture them all, and when they did, only the gods could save them from his wrath. At the thought of the evasive humans, the Grey Wolf emitted a snarl that reverberated through his chest. His patience had run out, and the beast was now running rampant through his mind. He was determined to end the hunt. The thirst for the prowl left his skin tingling with need. It was time to bring them home. With one last look up at the moon, the Grey Wolf howled and then set off at a deadly pace through the forest. He could hear the heavy footfalls of his fellow wolf companions and knew that this would be the time in which they won the hunt. There could be no other outcome. Chapter 1. Nima was drifting in a dark dream of nothingness when a tingle down her spine caused her to shoot up in bed. Wiping the grogginess from her dreary eyes, she immediately knew something was not quite right on this cold night. The air was as still as it was every night, or as still as she could sense from underground. Nevertheless, the hair on the back of her neck stood up as a warning. Shuffling around in her bed, she first checked to make sure her younger brother and sister were fine before she investigated what had awoken her. The two children lay curled in a ball on the small bed in the corner of the room. Their small huffs of breath assured her that they were okay, their little bodies clinging to one another like vines. When she was sure they were still deep in their sleep, she climbed out of her warm covers and headed over to them. Staring at their innocence brought an overwhelming feeling of love and longing. She wished she could see them this way more often, so oblivious to the hardships of life, but it was too late. Her brother was already skittish, and her sister barely spoke a comprehensible word. The two children had been scarred by this world long before they could even understand it. Nima had tried to protect them, but what good could one young woman do for two angels in a world shrouded in darkness? They had been dealt a cruel hand, but so had all humans. Stroking their rough curly hair and smoothing her fingers across their dry skin, she committed them to memory. She would forever remember them like this, every time she saw Calum stare blankly back at her or whenever Jana stuttered on a word she couldn't form, frustration clouding her lovely brown eyes. Nima would remember how beautiful and untainted they were in sleep. Kissing their little brows, Nima looked at them one last time before she began a quick scan of their room. Everything was as it should be, but still, Nima felt a nagging at the back of her mind. Something was not quite right, and she would not be able to rest until she knew what it was. Anybody else would have dismissed the wave of unease that washed over her upon awakening, and in the past, so would she. But she had learnt harsh life lessons that taught her that by ignoring her instincts, she would be welcoming anarchy and death. It was only a matter of time until they were found. Walking over to the door, Nima popped her head out into the corridor and analyzed the dimly lit hallway. Although she was merely a young woman, her light brown eyes scanned the room with the practiced eye of a trained wolf. Her ears perked in an attempt to detect any uncommon sounds. The night wind whistled its silent tune, and yet Nima felt her unease grow to new heights. Her feet glided across the harsh floors of her home as she began a steady stroll out of her room. The corridors were winding, long, and narrow, and the walls were cobbled and rocky, indented with small stones and large ones alike. Loping down the corridor, she trailed her hands across the walls, feeling the rough stones graze her calloused hands as she made her rounds through her home. The familiar pebbles scraped across her knuckles as she made her way through the maze of corridors. The air became frosty as she drew closer to the mouth of the cave. The close space began to expand as she reached the old iron stairs that signaled the entrance to the village. The small stone ceilings extended outwards and upwards towards the earth above them. The tunnel-like corridors branched out into a large area that was framed by the centerpiece of the rustic stairs. The bronze, rickety stairs spiraled up towards a stone alcove that was lit by the pale moonlight filtering through bars in the ceiling. Stepping into the lighted room, Nima began a slow climb up the stairs, her pace increasing as she traveled up. The higher she climbed, the more steps she skipped, as a sense of urgency she did not feel before began to kick in. Her bare feet clambered along the cold metal as her arms gripped the banister for support. Her hand slid along the sharp metal as she pulled herself up the steeply winding stairs. When she reached the top of the rocky alcove, she stopped for a short moment, forcing air back into her lungs before she could move on to the next obstacle. Breath huffing from her mouth, she pushed her long, brittle hair away from her face, her fingers clutching her chest as she tried to regulate her breathing. The filtered shine of the moon shone down on the landing, bringing light to all the shadows that hid amongst her. Her eyes fluttered continuously as she attempted to look around the rocky area in which she stood. Though the light from the moon was diluted, it was more than her eyes were accustomed to. Her deep browns were used to the dank walls of this hovel they called home. This prison, they dubbed their salvation. There were no bright lights in their cells, just flickering fire, and, even then, they were more out than lit. Her room was a cell, and this village a prison, but it was safer than what lived above the walls. Her feet were caked in dust and dirt, her skinny brown feet stained black by the rough ground, but she could see them clearly. The black was not quite black, but more of a deep gray with streaks of brown and red. She could see color, strong, vibrant color that was normally muted underground. Shaking herself out of her awe of color, she observed the walls around her. High, pebbled walls that stood out at weird and uneven levels with large, jagged rocks. The light grays were shrouded in shadow in some parts and bright in others. Her eyes flickered over the shadows until she found what she needed, locating a hidden ridge that protruded from the far wall that would enable her to peer through the bars that marked the entrance to her home. Meandering over to the ridge, Nima gripped a protruding rock from the wall in her calloused hands, her short nails digging into the stones as she used her upper body strength to propel herself off the floor. Her feet grappled along the floor, swaying erratically until one found a purchase on a wobbly rock. Her dangling foot swung towards the wall and gripped a higher rock as her other foot slipped from a loose stone that stumbled to the floor. The hard rocks cut into her bare feet, making her footing precarious, though in her determination, the pain barely crossed her mind. As her feet ascended the wall, her hands continued to pave the way, pulling her body higher and higher up until her hand gripped the long ridge securely. Placing one forearm on the ridge, she gripped the edge with her other and pushed up until her waist lay flat along the ridge and her feet hung loose. Pulling herself the rest of the way, she used her knees to find balance before she stood. Her whole body was secure on the small bit of stone as she peered through the bars. At first glance, the night seemed quiet and settled. There was no sound of owls, as if all wildlife were hiding. The grass tickled her face as it sprouted alongside the bars. The smell of mud and dirt was a pleasant change from the damp and dank smell that she was constantly subjected to. Nima was on the brink of dismissing her initial instinct as nothing but nerves. The forest was silent, and there were no signs that anything was amiss. Her paranoia held no bounds. She seemed to always be on edge, waiting for the inevitable capture that all humans faced. As she was about to begin her descent down the very rocks that had injured her poor feet, she heard a sharp rustle coming from the nearby trees. Twisting her head in the direction she heard the noise, she waited to see if anything would manifest out of the trees. Wiping the sweat off her forehead with the back of her hand, she continued to wait. Her foot bounced impatiently as she watched the time go by. When what seemed like 10 minutes had passed and nothing had appeared out of the bush, she began to dismiss the feelings that had roused her from her sleep. Being the oldest of her now smaller family, Nima knew that she had become overly paranoid and cautious. Ever since the raiding of her underground village by the sentinel wolves, she had been more susceptible to her instincts. For she knew that more harm than good would come out of ignoring it. Her instinct was there for a reason. She had lost her family that fateful night, leaving her an orphan and the guardian of two. She could blame nobody but herself. It was all her fault. If she had embraced nature's gift to her, then maybe she could have saved her whole family. It was too late to change anything now. Her family had already been torn apart, but she vowed from that day forward she would never ignore her instincts again. Turning away from her morbid thoughts of guilt, she prepared herself for the downward climb off the ridge. She wasn't sure why she had been roused from her bed this night, but she knew something bad was bound to happen. She felt it in her bones, in the way her hair stood up along her arms and the way her skin prickled. It was in the way sweat gathered along her body, dripping down her skin in a steady dance, sliding in rhythm with her thumping heartbeat. Her nose flared, and her ears twitched like a wild animal sensing its prey, but in this scenario, Nima was the prey. The prey that was trying to outwit the inevitable capture by the predator. She could imagine the canines, sensing the danger they promised. There was a sort of awareness, a cautiousness to Nima. The air tasted different on her tongue. It was heavy. It was full of warning and foreboding. The still night did nothing to calm her nerves. She knew what was coming next, but she could not control the surprise and abject horror that ebbed through her at the sound of the first howl. The night was pierced by the high screech of a wolf, angry and vengeful. The sound was full of uncontrolled hunger. The animals were wild on the hunt. She could hear their thirst. Her head shot up as her ears rang with the chorus of responsive howls, her heart beating so loud and fast that she could feel it thumping through her throat. Pushing her frizzled curly hair out of her face, she gasped in a big breath of air to gain control over her emotions. She had to think, and think fast. By the loudness of their howls, Nima guessed that they were fast approaching her home. Their territory had been breached, and everyone slept on, blissfully unaware. Taking one last glance out to the forest, she began to scamper down the ridge, barely touching the ground before she scurried down the stairs in search of the alarm. Her journey into the depths of the cave was quick, her surroundings blurring before her eyes as she rushed deeper and deeper. The light of the moon trailed behind her until it faded completely, leaving her in nothing but damp darkness. Nima's heart was beating so fast she felt faint, but she had to reach that alarm before her body failed her. She fought against the weakening of her limbs, her hands swinging in choppy movements, legs dragging along the rough floor. Her slender form carried her as fast as it could to the oblong metal box that protruded from a wall in one of the many corridors. Not many people knew about the system, but Nima had made sure she was aware of these things when she had entered this village for the first time. The walls around her vibrated with the final powerful howl of the approaching sentinel wolves. They were coming. That was her last thought before she smashed down on the button, her arms raising in quick succession as she continued to punch it. They were coming. Chapter 2. Panting over the alarm system, Nima attempted to catch her breath as the ringing of the alarm permeated throughout the walls of the cave, jarring everyone from their silent slumber. A clanging noise came from the opening of the cave as metal shutters snapped shut, barricading the entrance with rusting black walls. The shutters were flimsy at best. To the wolves, they were probably like paper, something they could break through with very little effort. The alarm was foolish. It had probably sealed their fate more than it had saved anyone, but Nima still found herself clinging to the box as if it could save them. Nothing could. The sound continued to blare through the walls, providing the wolves with a beacon to their location. Hundreds of village members found themselves staggering into the long corridors. They were disoriented and confused, not yet understanding the gravity of the situation. They were under attack. Their freedom was slipping through their fingers before they could do anything to stop it. Nima wanted to warn them, to encourage them to move faster, but her words were stuck in her throat. Her mouth was dry, and she struggled to inhale. Once she regained control of her body, her surroundings snapped into focus. She realized her thin fingers were clinging to a metallic object and not her siblings. She had left them in a room alone. Calum and Jana would be panicking because of her absence and the loud shrieking noise of the alarm. Her feet moved and, before she even realized what she was doing, she was fiercely shoving people out of her way. She had sounded the warning, and now it was their choice how to respond. Her duty was done. She had to get back to her room. A red flashing light kept blinking throughout the corridors, bathing the walls and her skin in red. The color was a marker. A reminder of the cost they would pay for this small sliver of freedom they clung to. Pushing through the crowd, Nima began the quick jog back to her room, dodging the chaos that ensued within the narrow corridors. She was desperate, and in her desperation, she became fierce, pushing past confused people who were huddling against the walls. They were no longer her concern. Her siblings needed her now. Barging through their bedroom door, Nima was greeted with the sight of her brother's young body clasping a frightened Jana to his heart while stroking her hair. Her sorrowful sobs and his wide eyes reminded Nima of how much they relied on her. Had he wondered if she was another family member he had lost? She had to do better by them. The two young children were the only reminders of her mother and father. As their last surviving relative, she always felt an extra need to protect them from the harsh world they lived in. She wanted to shelter them from the dangers ahead, but she knew their time of safety was over. The walls of this village could be as cruel as the world outside. Stumbling across the room, Nima grasped their young bodies into a tight embrace, pressing kisses to Jana's forehead to help soothe the storm within their young hearts. "Don't worry, my loves, things will be fine," she reassured them, but her voice held no conviction. Her heart pounded with fear, but she would not cry in front of them. Blanking out all signs of fear, she placed them back on the bed before gathering the few items they had at their disposal, items she had to fight to protect from wandering eyes. "What's going on, Nia?" Calum murmured as his teary eyes met her stoic gaze. The use of her nickname brought a momentary smile to her face before it was replaced by urgency. "There is no time to explain, but we have to go now," Nima said, grabbing what little they owned to fit into her small satchel. She threw a couple of protein bars into the bag with a spare top for each person while she told Calum to put his shoes on. Placing shoes on the trembling Jana, Nima heard the screams and shouts of the village penetrate over the alarm, reminding her that time was not their friend. Placing a coat on each child, she gathered Jana in her arms while grasping Calum's small hand and pulling him along behind her. Peeking her head out of the room, she saw the crowd of scared people dwindling down the corridors toward the back of the cave. She noticed that the further they delved into the cave, the narrower the corridors became. Nima tied Jana to her front with a thin blanket so she would have full mobility of both arms. She slung the small travel bag on her back and followed her brother down the corridor. Adrenaline drowned out the gnawing hunger in her stomach. Villagers had gathered in clumps at the back of the cave, forming a large crowd of shuffling and sniffling people. Everyone was pushing and shoving in their bid to escape, but the tunnel seemed to delve no further. Where was the community ethic now? It was gone. Humans could be just as harsh to one another as the world outside when they were afraid. Nima refused to give in to the chaos, even though her body felt heavy like lead. The village had failed. They had barricaded people into a cave that seemingly had no other exit. It was a terrifying realization. They were trapped like caged animals while the hunters approached. Heavy thuds ricocheted off the metal barricades at the entrance. They were durable, but their fall was fast approaching. The whimpers of the villagers grew as the clanging of metal rattled their hearts. Nima refused to lose hope, even as doubt ebbed into her mind. Suddenly, movement from the front of the crowd was felt. The rock wall at the back was a hidden exit that opened when pressure was applied. Sucking in a breath of relief, she began pushing forward. Although the exit was small compared to the corridors, it was wide enough for two people to walk through at once. Nima waited for her turn, her eyes flicking back toward the corridor they had come from. She could hear the metal doors of the village clanging. She could imagine the hunters approaching, their focus narrow and intense. A loud thud was heard, followed by the sound of movement along the rocks. The intruders were inside. As fast as she could, she pushed her way through, ushering Calum through the crowd. She was focused entirely on protecting her family. The people were in a frenzy, climbing over each other to get inside the passage. Looking back, Nima saw one of the village hunters, Victus, ushering in the last of the villagers. When everyone was in, he signaled for more men to assist him in pushing the rock wall closed. There was an urgency to their moves as they tried to force the heavy stone door shut. One figure stood out from the rest in the darkness of the corridor beyond, a powerful presence with eyes that gleamed in the shadows. The intruder's muscles strained as they sprinted toward the closing gap. The door thudded closed just as the pursuer reached the wall. A resounding thud shook Nima from her thoughts. She could hear the growling outside the corridor as the intruder continued to slam against the stone. She could almost feel those eyes watching from the other side, carrying a haunting promise of the hunt to come. Chapter 3. Nima shook off the eerie feeling the hunter's eyes had left on her. Her frame trembled as she realized how close they had been to meeting their end. So close. Her lip bled as she gnawed on it in an attempt to gain control over her emotions. She hadn't felt such profound fear in a long time, the type of fear that settled heavy in her bones, making movement impossible. Her brain turned to sludge and her limbs had locked up. That type of fear was crippling, leaving her hating herself in its aftermath. A smooth arm glided over her shoulder and gripped her free hand. Rough fingers met her own. A quick squeeze was given before it disappeared as if it had never been there, like a ghost's breath whispering along her fingers. Nima eyed the broad back of Victus as he marched away from her, her fingers twitching with the need to reach for him again. The craving for comfort that she hadn't felt for years overwhelmed her until she stood quaking. She wanted to ask him for some of his strength, which was evident in his broad shoulders and steady gait. In a world of gaunt people, he was strong and healthy. His dark auburn hair was cropped short in jagged strands, and his skin was pale. She ached for him to turn around so she could finally see the color of his eyes. He was strong, a stark contrast to her scrawny frame. Shaking her head to clear her thoughts, she gripped Calum tighter and moved further away from the still-thumping door. The pursuer was persistent. The section of the cave they stood in had high ceilings that were dripping with water. The smell of damp was so strong she felt herself gag. Ball rose in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She was used to harsh conditions just as she was used to tamping down her body's reactions. She could not show any weakness. Glancing down at her siblings to see how they were faring, she noticed that Jana had managed to fall asleep despite the havoc. Her baby cheeks were ruddy with heat, and her little fist was clasped around a lock of hair. Calum's eyelids were drooping over his eyes, his face streaked with dried tears. Nima felt her heart quiver at the innocence of her siblings, hoping against all odds that they would remain as oblivious as she had once been. Stroking Calum's hair, she whispered calming words, promising him she would keep them safe. Though she knew any innocence he had left had vanished before it had ever really existed. At the realization that she could see her siblings' features clearly, Nima looked for the source of light. It had been so long since she could clearly see anything. The gods had surely blessed her this day, first granting her moonlight and now the red hue of the rising sun. Only the hunters of the village were permitted to go outside and feel the light along their skin. Though it was mostly at night because that was the safest time, they were sometimes permitted out in daylight. They were the only people to constantly see light, but here Nima was seeing natural light twice in one day. Surely life could only improve from here. The struggle for life was a hard one, but humans for centuries had remained resistant to the lure of the wealth the wolves and their circles held. They had foregone luxury for their humble lives of freedom. They were an emancipated people, but at what cost? Nima could only hope that this token of light would lead them into a better life, one where she did not have to scrounge for food because her pride refused to let her be taken advantage of. Though Victus had often given her food when he could, he had to remain discreet. Her small family went weeks without proper food, gnawing on tiny bars or using old bones for broth that was flavorless and rare. Water was controlled, as was every other aspect of their lives. Politics underground was almost as hard as it was above ground, especially for a woman, but at least Nima could choose her fate. Many women formed relationships with hunters in order to survive, but Nima had found other ways. What difference would survival make if she became a prisoner to a man in the same way she would a wolf? She could not relinquish her rights, because then she could not control what happened to her siblings. Giving her body meant giving over everything to someone else, and though Victus was the only man she could imagine a life with, there were still politics to consider. Nima would have to bend to another's will. The possibility was too much to bear. Clutching Calum's head to her hip, she surveyed their surroundings wearily. This village was not her home, but it had become the place where she reared her siblings. She would miss it, even if she was glad to finally be leaving. Stepping further into the room, Nima glanced at the front of the cave where water gushed through some gates, dropping down into a stagnant stream. To the side of the stream was a cluster of rocks with a large opening which allowed the orange light to splash through. Nima ushered her siblings awake and swung her bag from her back, rummaging inside to find 3 protein bars. Giving them one each, she encouraged them to eat quickly and wash the food down with a gulp of water from a small flask. Placing half of her own bar back inside the bag, she shouldered it once more. A sliver of warmth from the sun shone through, kissing her skin with its healing energy. Though it was still dark outside, the sun had begun to rise, and the moon was going into slumber, the two fighting their battle for dominance over the earth. "Listen up, everyone," shouted Stephen, one of the leaders of the underground village. His tall body still carried some of the muscles of his youth, but his grayish beard gave an indication of his age. Harsh lines were around his mouth and eyes, making him look depleted. His face held no hope. "Outside of this gate, there will be nothing for miles until we reach the river where we have hidden boats." Everyone began cheering as hope was restored. Their joy overrode all caution they should have held onto. Nima felt a small smile growing on her face, knowing they might evade the wolves for another day. However, this thought was crushed when Stephen's brief smile disappeared and was replaced by a frown. Nima searched the crowd for Victus, hoping he would give an indication of what was happening. She saw Stephen turn his back to the people while he and the other council members discussed in hushed whispers. For minutes, they stood there discreetly arguing as the crowd cheered in relief, as if their noise could not be heard through the bars. Nima's pessimistic attitude began to build as she noted the tense faces of the other members. She caught a glimpse of Victus toward the side of the councilman, lingering in the discussion but not quite present. His eyes flickered to Nima's quickly as he nodded his head slightly, gesturing for her to make her way toward him. His eyes were bright and blue, like the sky in the warmer months. They looked like home. Slowly walking through the elated people, she made her way toward him, her eyes fixed on his as she ushered Calum forward. As she reached the front, Stephen slowly turned to face the audience while grasping his wife's hand. "The boats are very far, and the wolves will invade before the sun rises. We have to leave now, but I'm sorry, not all of us will make it." At his statement, the rage of the people manifested into loud shouts. People began pushing toward the council while men began climbing toward the gates in an attempt to break the bars to their freedom. Nima stood by watching the enraged crowd, her hand instinctively gripping Victus's and her free one pulling Calum closer. They had to get out. Victus clasped her hand tightly and gave her a last squeeze before he stepped forward. "That's why we have to leave now," shouted Victus as he pushed his way before the councilman. "We need to leave everything behind and make our way through the forest as fast as we can. Daylight will provide us with a slight advantage as their power will be waning." He glanced around at his people, seeing the fear while tears streamed down mothers' faces. His eyes met Nima's, taking in her appearance before he faced the front again. "There's still hope for us yet. Open the gates." At his prompting, men and women began prying open the heavy metal gates. When they were pulled as far as they could go, the villagers rushed through and began climbing up the rocks. There was a steady flow of people running through the gates toward the stream. "No matter what happens, you don't let go of my hand," she whispered to her brother. Caleb, realizing the peril they were in, began crying. Stroking his hair with her free hand, she mumbled words of praise, telling him how proud she was of him and how brave he was. She comforted him until his tears dried and his body stopped shaking. "We'll make it, little brother, we'll survive." Victus made his way back to her and pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace. His focus was intense as he propelled her and her family through the gates and toward the rock wall. Lifting Caleb first, he handed him to the man who stood on top of the wall, and then he faced Nemo one last time. He gave her a final look of encouragement, lifted her in his arms, and handed her up to the man standing by Caleb. Looking down at Victus, Nemo whispered her goodbye before she gripped Caleb's hands and pushed him through another set of gates. These ones were jagged and rusting from the elements. With her feet numb from the cold water, Nemo climbed through after, protecting Jana in her arms as she crouched through the bars. Inhaling the fresh air, her eyes adjusted to the sharp light of the dwindling moon and the rising sun as they began their sprint toward the boats. Running through the forest with the grass beneath her feet was a luxury Nemo hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. The fading moonlight glimmered off her skin, a reminder of the life her people had missed out on. The anger swelling in her heart fueled the power her body needed to endure the long distance to the boats. Chapter 4. Pushing branches out of the way, Nemo sprinted through the foliage as the trees became more dense. Realizing they were approaching the river, she prompted Caleb to run ahead. The weight of Jana had begun to take a toll on Nemo's weak body, and she found she could no longer run as fast. Her mouth was dry, and her throat burned, but she was faring better than many others. Slowing to a fast walk, Nemo felt a surge of hope when she saw the boats waiting at the shore. She ushered her brother onto one of the boats, sighing as she adjusted herself in the seat. There were only 2 village hunters and about 6 others on her boat. She knew that at least half the village population was missing. Peering down at the bundle in her arms, she realized the motion had awoken the little one from her slumber. Believing she was safe for now, Nemo took in the world outside the caves. It had been years since she had seen the rich green of trees or the clear blue of rushing water. She could only imagine what it would be like to laugh freely with the sun on her back, watching her brother play by the water while Jana picked at the grass. The sound of raised voices shook Nemo out of her musings. Stephen stood by the shore arguing with his wife, Mary, whose gestures were quick and angry. "We can't afford to wait any longer. Why make us all risk being caught just to wait?" "It's not fair, Stephen," she cried. "Mary, do you hear yourself? You're asking me to leave people to be caught," Stephen bellowed. He seemed to have had a change of heart about leaving people behind. "What you're doing is cruel," she whispered, her face flushed. "This wait is unbearable. We have freedom in our grasp, and you make us wait like sitting ducks. What will you do when they come? You won't stand a chance, and neither will we. Let us go." Nemo agreed with Mary. She feared what would happen to her siblings if they were caught. Though she wanted to wait for Victus, she knew it was his nature to put others first, and he would likely be among the last to leave. Nemo couldn't afford to be so selfless. She had her siblings to think of. The argument ended abruptly when Stephen, lost his frustration, struck his wife. He shook his head in conviction. "No, Mary. If they come for us all." The silence was disrupted by Mary's weeping as she pleaded at his feet, but Stephen turned his back and strode into the forest to urge more people toward the boats. Nemo was not shocked. She had seen such things before. It was a harsh reminder of the world they lived in. Waiting, Nemo began singing a soft lullaby to her siblings, promising them safety and love. As she finished, a stream of villagers charged toward the boats, but Stephen and his followers refused to let them set sail yet. The sun rose higher, and the heat beat down on them as they continued to wait. Finally, the last members of the village ran through the trees, relief on their faces, but the hunters were right on their heels. At the sight of the pursuit, Stephen began shouting for the boats to sail. Chaos erupted as the hunters reached the shore, and the struggle began. The village hunters fought back with all their strength, but they were overwhelmed by the power of their adversaries. Nima saw someone fall, covered in blood. Thinking it was Victus, she stood, only to realize it was an older man. Realizing they were under full attack, she urged the leader of her boat to start paddling, but he was intercepted, and the oar was snapped. Nima jumped into action. Pushing Jana around to her back, she grabbed her brother's wrist and made a mad dash for the shrubbery at the side of the river. She ran past the sounds of struggle and the cries of those being captured. The scene was harrowing, filled with the sights and sounds of a lost battle. She could not see Victus in the carnage, but she had to focus on Jana and Calum. She ran through the bushes, her head flicking back to ensure they weren't being followed, dragging her brother slightly behind her so she would take the brunt of any attack. "Where do you think you are going?" a growling voice called out. Nima skidded to a halt. She turned, trying to find the source of the voice among the trees, then ran right into a tall, imposing figure. The figure was a hunter in a partial transformation, standing ready for battle. Nima stumbled back, tucking Calum behind her, her eyes fixed on the hunter's intense gaze. He scented the air, catching Calum's fear. "If you fight, I will hurt you. But if you come willingly, you will be spared," he rumbled. Nima knew when to concede. What good would fighting do but put her siblings at risk? She needed to stay alive for them. Placing her trembling hands in her brother's, Nima followed the hunter. She could see his disappointment. He had expected a struggle. She was only glad she had heeded the warning. They made their way back to the river, where villagers were being loaded onto sleek, metallic aircraft that hovered just above the ground. The hunter shoved Nima toward one of the machines. When she hesitated, he gripped her shoulder firmly, a subtle but dangerous reminder of his strength. "Now is not the time to change your mind," he snarled. "I will bring you back one way or another." The threat was enough to get her moving. Lifting her brother onto the craft first, she climbed in after him. Nima scurried to the back as the aircraft took off. She quickly untied Jana and checked over both siblings. Finding them unharmed, she pulled them both to her chest. The three of them gazed out at the sunrise as they were carried across the sky. Chapter 5. When all the humans from Nima's village had been transferred into the main compound, they were separated into two lines. Wolves in their human forms demanded the name and age of each person, typing details into transparent screens and taking photographs. Once processed, they were forced to face a stage where a tall, white-haired man stood. Behind him was a line of formidable guards, some remaining in a partial transformation, their eyes glowing with an intensity that made many of the humans tremble. The air was thick with tension. Nima's eyes scanned her neighbors. Many had wounds from the struggle at the river and could barely stand, yet they stayed upright out of fear. She kept Calum and Jana behind her, trying to shield them from the display of dominance. The sun had begun its descent, preparing to shroud them in a darkness that felt both literal and symbolic. A sharp whistle over the microphone cut through the murmurs. The white-haired man leaned over the podium, his gaze sweeping over the captives with cold satisfaction. A broad, dark-skinned man with hazel eyes stood to the side, his expression resigned as he watched the proceedings. "You are gathered here today to witness the punishment of those who thought they could remain hidden," the white-haired man announced, his voice booming. "Their reluctance to submit has consequences. Each person above the age of 16 will receive a lash for every year they stayed away from a facility. Let this be a warning, to hide from us will only result in blood." Howls filled the air, a chorus of triumph. The punishment was more than a lesson, it was a display of authority. The guards began dragging people toward the stage. Nima felt a pang of regret for being honest about her age. At 22, she was facing more than she would have at 16. The wolves administered each sentence separately, ensuring the weight of the moment sank in for everyone watching. They started with the men, aiming to break the strongest spirits first to fuel the fear in the crowd. Nima watched as a young man was strapped to the beams. He looked fragile between the two guards. At the first strike, he let out a harrowing cry that made Nima wince, as if she had felt it herself. One by one, people were punished until they had to be carried away, disappearing behind the podium. She searched for Victus as the men were processed, hoping to see his familiar face. When they moved on to the women, and he still hadn't appeared, a heavy realization settled in her chest. If he weren't here, he likely wouldn't survive the forest. She pushed back the grief, vowing never to forget his bravery or the brief moment of connection they had shared. Behind her, Jana clung to her legs, and Caleb buried his face in her back. Their tears soaked through her clothes. So many children were being forced to witness the breaking of their community. Desperate for a distraction, Nima scanned the high walls of the facility. In her peripheral view, she noticed one of the guards at the back of the podium. His hazel eyes flashed a startling red for a moment before he turned away, his jaw tight. Before she could process it, a shadow fell over her. 2 guards stood before her, their expressions unyielding. Nima's heart dropped. They gripped her arms, pulling her from the line. Her siblings refused to let go, their small bodies shaking with terror as they clung to her like a lifeline. The guards tried to shake her roughly to dislodge the children, but the pair only held on tighter. "I'll get them to let go. Just give me a minute," Nima stammered, imploring the guards for a moment of peace. They stepped back, allowing her to crouch down in front of her siblings. She pulled them into a fierce embrace, whispering reassurances into their ears even as her own heart hammered in her throat. Seeing them like this made her feel a profound sense of failure, yet she had to stay strong. She looked at a young girl standing nearby, perhaps 15 years old, with blonde hair and eyes full of fear. "Please," Nima whispered, "don't let them watch." The girl gave a tearful nod. Nima kissed her siblings one last time and pushed them toward the girl's protection. Wiping her face, Nima turned to the guards. For a brief second, she saw a flicker of something like sympathy in their eyes before they became masks of indifference. As she was escorted toward the stage, she called back, "Caleb, Jana, close your eyes. Don't look. I'll be fine." The closer she got to the beam, the more her body rebelled. Her mind screamed for her to run, but her legs felt like lead. As one guard reached for her arm to secure her to the strap, instinct took over. She lashed out, her nails catching his skin in a final, desperate bid for freedom. A gasp went up from the crowd. Her movements were erratic, fueled by pure desperation. In her struggle, she was caught off guard when the second guard gripped her hair to pull her back. The force made her world blur into a haze of color and noise. When her vision cleared, she felt a warm trickle at the back of her neck and realized her wrists were now firmly strapped to the beam. She pulled against the leather, but it only bit deeper into her skin. The white-haired man walked back to the microphone, his eyes narrowing as he looked down at her. A cruel light danced in his gaze. "Double her lashes," he growled. Nima's eyes widened. The first strike tore through the air and then her skin. She bit her lips so hard she tasted blood, using that sharp sting to distract herself from the agony on her back. As the punishment continued, tears fell silently. By the 10th strike, a strange numbness began to set in, and she clung to a single thought: it will be okay. But as the world grew dim, even she found that hard to believe. Chapter 6. Nima was not sure what it was that woke her, maybe the slight buzzing noise or the endless plane of white penetrating through her closed eyelids. All she knew was that something wasn't right. Slowly raising her body, the fire she had felt in her back returned tenfold, causing her to cry out. Sweat gathered on her lip as her face crumpled into the pillow. Her body shook, and her back throbbed with a rhythmic, agonizing pulse. A cool wetness ebbed from the wounds and dripped over her waist. She lay there, quietly sobbing as the room spun. Her breath hitched, stuck in a dry throat, and her heart began to hammer erratically before consciousness started to fade once more. The heavy clunk of shoes on the linoleum floor pulled her back. Coughing as quietly as she could and wincing at the burn in her spine, Nima forced air into her lungs in greedy gulps. She studied her heart, playing the part of the unconscious patient. A nurse came into the room, heading straight for the bedside. Nima watched her through squinted, half-lidded eyes, suspicious of the clinical white walls that signaled a hospital. In her peripheral view, she saw the nurse emptying a vial of red liquid into a fluid bag. Instincts flared. She didn't want whatever the wolves were offering. Slowly, making no sound, Nima pulled the tube from her arm, keeping her body limp. When the nurse reached over her to tend to her back, Nima acted. She lunged out and grasped the woman's hand. Twisting her body upright sent a wave of fire through her spine that made her clench her teeth so hard they ached. She counted to 10 in her mind, waiting for the agony to dull to a throb. Sweat beaded on her skin as she glared at the nurse. "Where are they?" she croaked, her voice dry and brittle. "The little girl and boy who were with me." The nurse remained stoic, trying to pull her wrist free. "I asked you a question," Nima growled. When the woman remained silent, Nima tightened her grip and twisted. A sharp snap echoed throughout the room. A perverse sense of achievement flowed through Nima as the nurse shrieked. It was unhealthy, she knew, but these wolves had caused her family nothing but pain. It felt only fair to return a modicum of it. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Nima bellowed, her anger fueled by the terrifying void of her siblings' absence. "Where are they?" She reached for the nurse's other wrist, ready to double the damage, when a voice boomed from the doorway. "That will be enough." The Alpha's gaze. Nima released the nurse and twisted to face the intruder. Standing in the doorway was a tall man with skin the color of deep mahogany and shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the frame. He possessed an aura of authority that made the air in the room feel heavy. He had a thick nose, a dark beard, and piercing hazel eyes. Khan leaned against the door, watching the tiny female on the bed. A corner of his lip twitched. For a woman who claimed to despise his species, her behavior was remarkably animalistic. He stepped forward, dismissing the sobbing nurse with a few quiet words. He knew he had his hands full. He had watched her at the podium, the way she stared him down, challenging his authority even as she faced a death sentence. It had riled his wolf, making it difficult to maintain his human form. He was on the cusp of becoming the regional alpha, and the smallest challenge felt like a spark to a powder keg. Yet, he had also seen her with the children. He had felt an uncomfortable swell of pity that had quickly turned to anger. He was angry that she was so reckless with her own life when those two little ones clearly relied on her. He was surprised she was still alive. 12 lashes would have killed most women of her stature. But his mate, for his wolf, had already claimed her. Was a rebel. Even in her sleep, she had been dangerous, lashing out at the healers. "You would not suspect those two children were related to you by the way you behave," Khan drawled, stopping near the bed. "They seem like angels compared to your devilish ways." He remembered how the children had reacted to him in the infirmary. The boy had been cold and protective, but the little girl had eventually climbed into his lap and fallen asleep against his chest. They were sweet, unlike this hellion. Nima's eyes sparked with a mix of rage and hope. "And where have you placed my siblings?" she questioned, her voice suddenly demure. The change in her body language didn't fool him. She had shifted from a predator to a manipulator in a heartbeat. "They are safe," Khan said, his voice dropping an octave. "But whether they stay that way depends entirely on how well you heal and how well you behave." Chapter 7. Nima watched the towering man with a mask of icy calm. She knew her explosion with the nurse had made him wary, and part of her regretted the lack of control, but the void where her siblings should be was a screaming ache in her chest. She worried about Calum and Jana, and the brave blonde girl who had stood by them. Were they being brainwashed? Were they already lost to some cold, clinical facility designed to break human spirits? She bit her lip, forcing the rage down. The man before her, this alpha, was not someone who could be moved by demands or feral snapping. He was a force of nature, dangerous and vibrating with an untamed energy that seemed to warp the very air around him. He was otherworldly. If one could ignore the suffocating aura of violence he projected, he was devastatingly handsome. He wasn't the model type her mother had whispered about in stories of the old world, nor was he the lean, rugged type like Victus. He was an untamed bear of a man. His mahogany skin glistened with health, framed by a wild, dark beard that shrouded the jagged battle scars on his jaw. His lips were thick and wide, distractingly so, and they looked chapped, as if he were dying of thirst. And he was looking at her as if she were the only thing that could quench it. "Are you quite finished yet?" Khan snarled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Nima's bones. "You will not find the secrets of your siblings' whereabouts on my body." Nima stiffened, realizing he had moved from the door to the center of the room while she was lost in her analysis. He was closer now, his presence stifling. "I'm quite aware your body doesn't hold any answers," she said, her voice clear. She refused to be ashamed of looking. She was human, and he was a powerful specimen. But she had to be smarter. She eased herself off the bed, gritting her teeth against the liquid fire that raced up her spine. She stepped toward him, looking up to meet his piercing hazel eyes. She placed a small palm against his chest, her thumb subconsciously stroking his pectoral. "I'm sorry for my behavior," she murmured, her voice softening into a plea. "My siblings are everything to me. Please, give them to me." The contact was electric. Her mouth watered at his scent, an intoxicating mix of earth and musk. It was as if he had been designed specifically to arouse her. No man in the village had ever made her feel this carnally ravenous. Khan looked down at the little witch. Her touch sent tingles of warmth through him that reached the deepest pits of his soul, but he was a warrior. He would not be beguiled. He grasped her wrist and firmly removed her hand. "You think to enchant me with your little games?" he growled, his breath fanning her face. "You think to humble yourself only because you were caught? Do not play with me, little human." He jerked her body against his, forcing her to feel the hard planes of his muscles. "Your siblings are mine to do with as I wish, just as you are, little mate. Challenge me, and you shall feel my wrath." He bared his canines, a silent promise of retribution. He wanted to see her wild, to snap her control so he could be the one to rebuild it. It was a trap, and Nima fell headlong into it. A piercing screech left her throat, a battle cry. She launched herself at him, scratching and lashing out like a banshee. She wanted to maim him, to leave a scar so deep he would see her face every time he looked in a mirror. She managed to swipe his lip before he spun her around, pinning her back against his chest. The impact sent a ripple of agony through her stitched back. He squeezed her tight, his hand gliding up to her throat, tilting her head to the side. "I warned you not to play with me," he whispered into her ear, his voice dark with delirium. He nipped her earlobe, his hand trailing down to her waist. For a heartbeat, Nima felt her body betray her, wanting to melt into his heat. But the rage was deeper. She drove her elbow into his stomach and bellowed, "I'll be damned if I'm going to be some psychotic mutt's mate." The cost of defiance. Later, Nima's head throbbed in sync with her back. After her outburst, Khan had shown her exactly how much he appreciated her challenge by nearly yanking the hair from her scalp. Her head was tender, the dry scabs of small cuts clumping her hair together. She followed a bubbly, black-haired woman named Sahina down a long corridor. A tall, red-haired guard followed them, shooting Nima glares that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Nima was trying to formulate a plan. If she had to pretend to be a pacified mate to see Calum and Jana, she would. She would bide her time until she got the alpha alone again, and next time, she wouldn't play fair. And then while you are, doing it, he will bite you in front of everyone to show his claim, Sahina gushed, her voice airy and excited. Nima froze, the world spinning. The woman's words pierced through her thoughts of revenge. In front of everyone? She had known, deep down, that she would eventually have to lie with this man. She could even admit, privately, that his touch ignited a craving she'd never known. But to be humiliated, to be taken like an animal in front of a feral crowd, panic rose in her chest. She stumbled against a corridor wall, gasping for air. Sahina didn't notice, continuing to prattle on about scent and genetic compatibility. One whiff, and they just know, Sahina sighed longingly. Nima stared at the floor in abject horror. There was no hope. This man intended to take what was left of her dignity in a public ritual of dominance, claiming her not as a partner, but as property. How could anyone prepare for that? Chapter 8. The hum of irritation that had buzzed in Nima's chest earlier had transformed into a roaring, unbridled fury. By the time the mating ceremony arrived, she was absolutely livid. The wolves had pulled her last string, and she felt as though she were operating on pure, jagged spite. The night had been a blur of humiliation. After Khan left her, she was escorted to a sterile white room, another hospital-like chamber, but this one filled with grooming appliances. She had been stripped bare and roughly shoved into a shower by a group of spiteful, vindictive women. They pulled and prodded at her like she was livestock. Nima saw the jealousy in their eyes. They wanted the status that came with mating a wolf of Khan's stature, but Nima would have traded places with them in a heartbeat if it meant being free. They had dunked her head under water, scrubbed her skin raw, and yanked at her hair. It had taken 10 washes to get the dirt and dried blood out of her curls. Following the shower, they forced her into a scalding bath that smelled of chamomile and honey. Vermin, she had hissed at them. Living underground meant rations. She had survived on a single water token a week just to ensure her siblings could wash. These women treated her like scum, and finally, Nima snapped. She had grabbed a woman with frizzy hair and submerged her head in the bathwater, staring down the others until they backed away. It worked. They were quieter after that, feeding her chicken and applying buttermilk cream to her skin while she sipped a frothy drink through a straw. But the kindness was a facade. They led her to a bed and proceeded to rip every hair from her body with wax strips until she felt like a bald chicken, pink and tender. Sahina had stood by the door, yapping about how being hairless would maximize pleasure. Nima doubted she would feel anything but cold, hard resentment. By the time they finished, she was dressed in a transparent, silky gown that barely reached her thighs and offered no coverage for her breasts. No underwear. No modesty. When she asked for a coat, they merely snickered and shoved her out the door into the arms of her mate. The same mate who was currently carrying her over his shoulder like a sack of grain because she had spat in his face. The podium. Khan was unprepared for the sight of her. Her hair lay in silky curls, and her skin smelled of sugar, but her eyes were still spitting fire. He had made a lewd comment about plowing her into submission, which had earned him a damp beard, but he didn't care. He pushed open the great hall doors, his gait speeding up as he felt the warmth of her body through the thin silk. The room was draped in dim light, lit by massive candelabras and a shimmering chandelier. At least 50 people were present, far more than a standard mating. But this was no standard mating. This was the descendant of the Manasseh line taking his first mate. By claiming Nima, Khan was transitioning into his role as regional alpha, accepting his father's legacy and signaling the start of a new pack. Are all of them going to watch? Nima whispered, her voice trembling. Khan only grunted, marching toward a bed placed atop a raised podium in the center of the room. The air was thick with the scent of musk and anticipation. Nima felt sick. This was the antithesis of everything she believed in. Families were torn apart to create these superior bonds. Humans were whipped for hiding from the very race that enslaved them. How will I ever look at my children without remembering this night? She wondered, her heart breaking. She tried to pry his arms from her legs, but his fingers flexed deeper into her skin. He swatted her behind, a sharp, loud crack that made her gasp and drew the crowd closer. Please don't, she sobbed, her voice muffled against his back. I'd be willing if we could just go somewhere else. She tried to slide down his body, reaching his eye level. His nostrils flared, his eyes turning a void-like black. For a second, his tongue flicked over his lip as if he were considering her plea. Then he tossed her onto the bed. Nima hit the mattress, her hair splaying across her face. She watched in shock as he stripped off his shirt and tossed it aside. There would be no privacy. The blankets at the foot of the bed were for modesty, but Khan had no intention of using them. He wanted the world to see that this woman was his. He climbed onto the bed, stalking her like prey. This wolf grows restless, he panted, gripping her thigh and pushing her legs wide. Nima began to squirm, her hips rubbing against his as she tried to buck him off. She scratched at his chest, drawing lines of red that only added to the primal atmosphere. She had held out a desperate hope for a shred of humanity, a hope that he would see her as a person and not a prize. She had been a fool. The rock-hard evidence of his intent pressed against her, and as the crowd leaned in, Nima realized that the nightmare was only just beginning. Chapter 9. Nima could not believe what she had just been subjected to. Her body was still trembling from the aftermath, and her back was damp with perspiration and what she was sure was more blood from her wound. Tears welled in her eyes as she tried to throw the whole ordeal out of her mind, but doing so was impossible. Even after she had soaked her skin in a hot bath, scrubbed her skin raw, and wrapped herself in clothes, she could still smell his scent on her skin. Inside her, his touch still lingered on her body like a phantom. It was everywhere, even the very room she stood in smelled like him. She hated it. Her body reacted to him in the worst way possible. His scent enticed her and opened her to his touch, but she felt revolted at the notion of his skin on hers. She hated his sleazy advances, and even when she knew that deep down her body cried for his touch and slickened for him, her heart and mind felt absolutely depleted. She could not understand how a race that claimed its superiority over humans could ever condone rape, because essentially that was what it was. Sure, she may have cried for it towards the end, but she had refused him on numerous occasions beforehand, and he had refused to listen. For centuries, human beings have condemned it and will continue to do so. Could these wolves not understand that intimacy was about mental and physical willingness? Not just one or the other, but both. Thinking on the matter only made Nima aware that these wolves were so much worse than humans could ever be. She had been forced to fight the advances of so many males in the underground village, but they had understood the word no. Once she had said it, there had been no forcing. There had been no other acceptable option. It was either acceptance or rejection. Of course, there had been the occasional male who had blackmailed a woman into marrying or sleeping with him through the withdrawal of food. Some had even gone so far as rape, but there was no human culture that permitted and encouraged it, and there never would be. Men who raped a woman were often forced from the compound or banned from hunting, which was one of the harshest punishments. A man who could not provide was no man at all. These wolves, though, encouraged rape as if it were a positive aspect of life. What kind of creatures lived for centuries and had seen the evolution of societies in one lifetime, but could still not see that rape was a deplorable act, no matter how they tried to package it? It was wrong, and they were insane. Nima paced the fancy floors of her new prison. The Persian carpets were a distasteful reminder that wolves sat in the lap of luxury, while humans barely had enough to eat. What kind of world was this? She longed to return to those dark, damp walls of her room at her underground village, where she had barely any sustenance to survive, and the only light she had seen was the occasional flickering of a faulty light or a live fire. She preferred that morbid life to this one because at least then she'd had her family and her freedom. Now all she had were her thoughts to keep her company. Throwing the pillows that were placed on the big, fluffy bed, Nima continued her mental tirade on how immoral they were, her feet wearing a new route into the carpet. She was so mad, not just at him but at herself as well. How could she have allowed him to plant his child in her womb when her and her siblings' future was so uncertain? All this time, she had looked down on humans who were with wolves, and she had just become one. She knew she was only as good as her competency to give him children, and though her body was in no position to carry a child, not with her malnourishment, she was almost 100% sure she was pregnant right now. Wolves like him reeked of virility, and knowing her luck, she would be that 1% of the population that got pregnant instantly. Back home, her mother and father had taught her siblings everything they knew about the old world and how the new world came to be as it was. She came from a long line of scholars who had made sure that they had passed on any information that they had learned through the years. Her mother had memorized some of these teachings and had begun reciting them to her and her siblings when they were little, but when they reached the age of 10, their father had taken over. The knowledge given to her by her father ranged from the understanding of how the old world was geographically set out to some of the chemical elements that polluted their air, and most importantly, all the information they had on wolf society and biology. As a result, Nima knew full and well that human genetics and wolf genetics, though compatible, often took a while to procreate. Alphas, however, had an uncanny ability to impregnate women on the first go, and Nima had the misfortune of going a couple of rounds with one. The scar on her neck was a clear reminder of what her future would be. She would be stuck rearing one of his demonic children whilst her siblings were shipped off somewhere likely to be raised by a human-bashing wolf and her equally cruel mate. She would be trapped with a baby that she loved and resented at the same time, and a man she would spend every moment of her life plotting to kill. What kept Nima mad, though, was her reaction to him. She hadn't fought him enough. Sure, she had scratched him a bit and even managed to bite him, but she had a feeling that it had only excited him more. He had become wild and rough after she bit him, discarding the fact that he was her first, and his eyes had completely dilated. His body seemed to enlarge. The throbbing between her legs was a testimony to just how much bigger he had grown. Nima wished that she had given her virtue to Victus. At least, he would have been gentle with her. Maybe Victus wouldn't have made her feel like her mate did, but at least it would have been her choice, and in the privacy of their rooms. Plus, she had a soft spot for Victus that transcended the mate bond. Anybody who showed her siblings the love and patience of a parent was worth more to her than any bond, especially as it seemed to be one-sided, with her mate feeling it more than she did. She felt an irrevocable pull towards him, but if she had not been forced to be with him, Nima would have easily been able to ignore him. What a weak bond. Marriages in the human world seem to mean more these days. Humans who married never separated, mainly because the women could not escape, but also because they were reluctant to. Nima would leave him in a heartbeat if only she knew where her siblings were. If this supposed mate of hers wanted to keep her, it was in his best interest to return them. The longer he kept them from her, the more her resentment grew. It would continue to fester until it grew into an infectious wound that could not be healed, a pus-filled and bloody wound in need of amputation. She would cut him off within the blink of an eye. He could prevent this, though, if he just brought her siblings and told her where the young girl was. She could not forget the young girl. Was it really too much to ask to see their little faces and to know that they were okay? It was the least he could do after violently humiliating her. Nima, why do you act this way? Did I not make it good for you, little mate? Khan questioned from the doorway. His presence caused the air to crackle with pent-up passion and her shoulders to rise in frustration. Enjoy it. She screeched. How could I have enjoyed it when I didn't even want to be mated to you in the first place? You took my bloody innocence in front of a crowd of beats. My siblings are missing, and now I'm probably pregnant with an unwanted baby. Her tirade had started off strong, but towards the end, her voice had become a strangled mess, and tears were trailing down her chin as she sniffled with hurt. I don't even know your name, she wept. The realization that she and her family belonged to a man whom she didn't even know, a man who was not even really a man, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Heaving a deep sigh, Khan stepped into the room and brought the crying woman to his chest. Her body was tense in his arms, but she did not fight. He was sure the mating must have taken a lot of energy out of her because he knew his mate would be clawing at his skin otherwise. Since the moment he saw her in line, that was all she had done, fought her way through the sentinels, fought her way out of the hospital bed, and fought him and his claims. She had fire that would give him great pleasure to tame. Looking at the dangling chandelier on the ceiling, Khan tried to comfort his mate. He understood perfectly how she was feeling. She was not the only one who was initially reluctant to be mated. On the rare occasions that he had thought about his future mate, Khan had imagined her to be a wolf. A few of his kind had enough human genetics in their blood to hold the wolf form and mate with full-blooded alphas like him. They were only a small percentage stronger than a human due to the dilution of their genetics, and they did not hold any political importance, but he had hoped he would be mated to one of his kind. A she-wolf who was part of the new world, one who not only understood the legacy he was born into but appreciated his contribution to the creation of this modern world, a beautiful she-wolf who would be submissive to his will and crave his touch. He had never been averse to a human, but he had never wanted a human who dwindled in the sewers like rats. A human who had accepted their role in wolf society was just as important as any wolf. Their commitment to their pack was what made the creation of the new generation. His grandmother had been one of those humans. She had lived in a little house in his great-grandfather's compound, and when his grandfather had found her, she had jumped at the opportunity of being one of the first human females to breed into the Manasseh bloodline. She was a humble human, and when she died during childbirth, her grandfather refused to take another mate. Such bonds were admirable. They truly transcended the bonds of time and were what all wolves hoped for. Khan was not as fortunate as his grandfather. He was instead cursed with a resilient human who was half dead and had more walls than the ones surrounding this compound. An angry and bitter human for a mate. Surely she could see that she was not his ideal mate, but either way, they were in this situation together now, and she would be the mother of his children. Though he didn't particularly like her, he would rather be killed than give up his mate. No matter how hard they fought it, she was a part of him now, and any child she bore him would only strengthen that bond. As much as her fight annoyed him, he couldn't help but praise her strong will, even going so far as to hope his children were as strong as hers. Stop your worry, your siblings are safe inside the nursery. You may visit them as often as you please, but they are to remain there until you are halfway through your pregnancy. I will not risk my pup's well-being, soothed Khan. His hands ran along her back as he nuzzled her neck. He hated his reaction to her, but at the same time, he craved it. I know this is not ideal, but this is our reality now, he finalized. Wait, Nima mumbled, abruptly pushing away from his shoulder. Did I hear you right? Did you say I may visit my siblings? When did I ask for your permission? If you expect me to carry your pup, then you had better bloody move them into an adjoining room, she bellowed, her arms flailing around her in her anger. She was shocked that he would even try to stop her from seeing them. She couldn't believe it. What kind of person isolated two children from the only family they had left? She was perfectly capable of taking care of the two and still taking care of her body. He had no reason to separate them unless he was trying to enforce his control over her. I may visit them, he said. They must stay there, he said. As if I would listen, she mumbled under her breath. At his words, her pacing had started up again. She had gone from tired and compliant to absolutely livid in 2 seconds flat. The wolf had to be demented if he thought she would listen to a word he said, especially when it was regarding her siblings. A long string of curse words tumbled from her mouth as she shot glares at him over her shoulder. Gripping her shoulder mid-stride, Khan dragged Nima around to face him. My name is Khan Manasseh, and I am a descendant of the first fathers of the Wolfen Brethren, Alpha of the North, and I will not have some lowly human defy my words. I understand that you do not understand this world, but here in this region, my word is law. So you listen to me when I say that if you wish to ever see your siblings, you will treat me and your body accordingly. If not, I will not hesitate to lock you in this room. Do not challenge me, Nima. I will be pleasant no longer. Khan huffed out. He did not want to make an enemy out of his mate, but if she continued to provoke him, he would have to show her how feral he really could be. Humans often forget that the wolf and the man were not separate identities. Everything he did was as one. The wolf was him, and he was the wolf, one mind but two forms. He knew it was hard for them to comprehend. Maybe if she understood, she wouldn't treat him like a mortal. If she understood, she would not provoke him like this and would practice more caution. Even now, he had the urge to pin her to the wall and force her to submit. He had already demonstrated to her once that he had no reserve to force into submission. He did not shun violence. If she continued, the small control he held would dissipate, and then she would see the real him. This was why Khan wanted a female wolf. She would know to be submissive in his presence, and she would never challenge his commands or wish to strike him. Khan acknowledged, though, that no she-wolf would ever dare to bite him, and he quite liked that Nima did. His mate was wrong for him, but he found that he had already grown attached to her willful ways. She needed to be tamed, but with a few lessons, she would soon understand her place. It would not be beside him until she learnt to respect the hierarchy. "Just get in the bed. I am tired and do not have the energy for this," Khan growled out. The hold on his patience was gradually disappearing any longer, and he would surely strangle her. The demented female wasn't being violent yet, but she was wearing a hole in his brand new carpet. All her pacing was driving him mad. At his words, her head shot up, her mouth opening as if to rebuke him. "Do not argue with me, woman. It is late, and my control is about to snap." His words were clearly full of conviction because Nima closed her mouth and climbed into the bed. Rolling to her side, she studied the maroon walls of Khan's room. The furnishings were very lavish, with heavy drapes and customized furniture. She supposed it wasn't such a bad-looking prison, but the pretty walls didn't detract from the fact that it was one. She did not want to lie next to him, but she found that she was way too tired to actually put up a fight. The day had been long and emotionally exhausting, and she just wanted to sleep so she could put her plan into motion the next day. Khan climbed into the bed with her, dragging her body towards his bare chest. He swept her hair to one side as his hands slid over her waist and around her chest. Pulling her body further into his, he gritted his teeth at the heat flowing through his body at her nearness. Nuzzling her neck and licking her mark for reassurance, Khan released a sigh as his body relaxed and he began to drift to sleep. "Tomorrow, my siblings are moving next door," she mumbled into his arm before he drifted to sleep. A smile rose on his face as his eyes shuddered. Of course, the little witch had to have the last word. It was just so her. Chapter 10. When Nima woke the next morning, her stomach was grumbling with a hollow, insistent hunger. The chicken she'd eaten the day before had been more than she was used to, but it had only served to remind her body of what it had been missing. Every muscle ached with a strange, heavy fatigue. She rolled over, bracing herself to face Khan, and let out a long sigh of relief when she realized his side of the bed was empty. She wasn't ready to deal with his overbearing personality so early. Especially not while her stomach was gnawing at her. Climbing out of bed, she took a moment to truly look at the room. Last night, she had been too blinded by humiliation to notice the decor. It was massive, featuring leather sofas and a fireplace, but the maroon walls and lack of personal trinkets made it feel cold and desolate. It fit Khan perfectly, gloomy and imposing. She trudged into the adjoining bathroom and conceded one thing: she could get used to this life as long as the bath stayed. In the underground villages, washing was a rushed affair in communal showers, usually spent scrubbing her siblings and trying to save every drop of water. This tub was like a small lake. She could probably swim laps in it if she knew how. As she soaked, Nima realized the fire in her back had dulled significantly. Reaching around, she felt rough, scabbed over lines where there should have been open wounds. It was as if the healing process had fast-forwarded weeks in a single night. She wondered if it was the result of the wolf genes Khan had mentioned, the strength he gave her to carry a wolf's child. She wasn't complaining. The lashings had been barbaric, and she was grateful to be able to move freely. She needed that mobility if she was going to find Calum, Jana, and the blonde girl. "Stupid wolves," she growled, splashing the water. "Who are you cursing now?" A voice chuckled from the doorway. Nima shot upright, bubbles flying. "God damn it!" she screeched, clutching her chest. Khan stood there, watching her with a determined glint in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. Before she could protest, he began stripping. Nima tried to paddle to the far side of the tub, but his aura of dominance seemed to fill the room, making resistance feel futile. Even through her anger, she felt a traitorous heat rising in her body at his presence. "Oh no, you don't," he groaned, reaching out and dragging her back to his side of the tub. "Let me go, Khan. I don't want to be in here with you," she protested, though her voice lacked its usual bite. Ignoring her, Khan began nuzzling her neck, his breath hot against her skin. He was reinstating his mark, purring like a predator claiming its prize. Nima found herself swatting at his face, trying to regain her composure. "I need to see my siblings," she gritted out. Khan's demeanor shifted instantly. His eyes flared a wild red, and his canines elongated. He gripped her hips, dragging her against him with a snarl. Nima realized she had to placate him. If she didn't, she'd never leave this room. Taking a breath, she placed her hand on his jaw, stroking his beard. She traced the scar on his brow and ran her fingers through his wet, dark hair. He looked primal, terrifyingly so, but as she touched him, the snarls turned into a low, rhythmic rumbling in his chest. The atmosphere in the bathroom shifted. The humidity created a sultry cocoon around them. Nima leaned in, her mind a riot of conflicting signals. She hated him, yet her body hummed with a desperate, carnal need for his scent and his touch. She found herself leaning toward his chest, her eyes locked onto his. For a moment, the hazel in his eyes held so much hope and longing that she was scared to look away. The bond pulsed between them, making her forget, for a few seconds, the crimes his kind had committed. A sharp cough from the doorway shattered the spell. Khan spun around, shielding Nima's body with his own. "How dare you set foot in here without permission?" he bellowed, his voice a brutal growl. "Do not ever do it again." I'm SS sorry," a voice stammered from the hall before retreating in a frantic hurry. The trance was broken. Reality came crashing back. Khan was the warden of her jail, the man who had stolen her family. Nima felt a flash of irritation. Not just at the intruder, but at herself. She could have used that moment to manipulate him, to trade her body for information about her siblings. Now, the opportunity was gone. Khan climbed out of the tub, his jaw set in a hard line. He hadn't agreed to her demand from the night before, to move her siblings next door, but Nima had no intention of waiting for his permission. She would do it herself. She only hoped he wouldn't mind too much when he found out. At least she could say she had warned him. Chapter 11. Nima sat at the vanity, clad in a blue jumpsuit Khan had practically thrown at her before stalking out with a demand that she stay put. His monosyllabic commands grated on her nerves, but she found herself obeying, hoping he'd sent someone to guide her to her siblings. It was infuriating how Khan could switch back to cold indifference while she was left reeling. In the few hours since their mating, Nima felt her internal compass spinning. She tried to tell herself that her sudden compliance, and the way she didn't pull away when he touched her, was purely for the survival of her family. But deep down, she knew the truth. The bite mark on her neck was like a physical tether. It made her crave his presence against her better judgment. The bond, once a weak flicker, was becoming a steady flame, and she loathed herself for how much she desired its warmth. The turning of the door handle snapped her out of her thoughts. She flew across the room to find Sahina, the talkative maid, waiting with a radiant smile. "Hi Nima. It is good to see you again. Your mating was so unreal. Everyone is still talking about the way you bit Khan," Sahina squealed, her eyes glistening with excitement. Nima cringed at the high-pitched voice. "I don't really want to talk about that. Can we just see my siblings?" Reunited. As they reached the large nursery, two small forms came hurtling toward Nima. Jana was squealing, her high-pitched babble a chaotic comfort to Nima's ears. Nima knelt, gathering them into her arms, feeling the dampness of Jana's happy drool and the quiet, steady weight of Calum. Calum didn't say much at first, but his nature had always been reserved. When he finally looked up, his long lashes were wet with tears. "I thought we would never see you again, like everyone else," he sniffled. Nima's heart broke. He was so young to have already learned the weight of abandonment, first their parents, then their older sister in a previous raid. "Oh, baby, I would never leave you. I was just a little ill, but I'm better now," she promised. It was a white lie they both chose to believe. The children looked transformed. They were clean, their skin radiant, and their hair neatly trimmed or styled into pigtails. Nima allowed them to drag her to a tiny chair at a children's table, watching with a lump in her throat as they ran off to play with foreign toys. Reluctantly, she had to admit, the compound provided a better life for them than the underground villages ever could. Here, there was sunlight, safety, and the sound of laughter echoing against bright yellow walls. The boy with silver eyes. As the afternoon progressed, Nima took a seat on a bench in the playground. The sun felt like a balm on her skin. "Are they your children?" a voice asked from behind her. Nima turned to see a tall, brown-skinned male with a head of wild, curly hair. He looked nervous, scratching the back of his neck. "They're my siblings. Do I know you?" "I'm Carson," he mumbled, his face flushing deep red. "I was, in your room earlier. When you were in the bathroom. Khan told me to get out." Nima's eyebrows shot up. This was the boy Khan had roared at. Up close, Carson looked fragile and impossibly thin for a werewolf. He lacked the typical bulk of his kind, appearing more like a lanky human. But when he flicked his hair back, she saw his eyes, piercing, sorrowful gray orbs that made her heart ache. "Oh, I remember. Why don't you take a seat?" she offered. Carson sat cautiously, eventually opening up as he realized Nima wasn't there to judge him. "Both my parents are wolves, but my mom is really deluded, and my father was too old to have me. I came out wiry," he explained. As they talked, Carson revealed something that shattered Nima's understanding of wolf culture. "Wolves have a true mate, but we live for a long time," he said. "If your true mate isn't born for 500 years, you seek companionship. We can have multiple mates, though the heir usually comes from the true mate for the strongest bloodline." The information hit Nima like a physical blow. She had always thought mate meant only. The idea that Khan could find someone else, a true mate, made her feel a strange, possessive pang she wasn't ready to acknowledge. It stripped the glamour away from the bond, making it feel like a biological lottery. A new beginning. After promising to meet Carson the next day so he could show her where the village teenagers were being kept, Nima headed back to her quarters. Sahaina appeared as if by magic to escort them. "Damn it, woman. Where did you come from?" Nima gasped, clutching her chest. Sahaina just beamed, tickling Jana as they walked. Nima tried to memorize the turns in the corridor, but every wall was the same nude color, every hallway a mirror of the last. Finally, they reached the landing to her and Khan's quarters. Nima led her siblings not into Khan's dark room, but into the adjoining suite. She pushed open the door and let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The walls were a soft, light blue. A stark, beautiful contrast to the maroon gloom next door. "So, guys, what do you think of your new room? Cozy, right?" she grinned. Jana was already busy plucking at the soft blankets on the king-sized bed, while Kaylin looked around with a wide, genuine smile. For the first time since the raid, Nima felt a flicker of real peace. They were together, they were safe, and for now, that was enough. Chapter 12. The meal had continued as if nothing had happened, but Nima was left reeling. She couldn't believe Victus had dared to look at her with such longing in front of her mate, nor could she believe Khan's explosive reaction. Now, the other wolves avoided her as if she were a carrier of the plague. She had never been popular, but now she felt like a ghost at the table. Khan was no longer the man who had shared a quiet moment in the bath. He was wild, his eyes daring her to challenge him as he forced mouthfuls of food into her mouth. He fed her with a dark intensity, ignoring the fact that she was long since full. The other wolves watched, their own gluttony turning their stomachs. They picked at third and fourth courses while humans in the villages starved. A sudden clatter at the broken door made Khan drop his fork. Sahaina stood there, squawking and gesturing in a panic. She rushed to Nima's side and whispered the news, but her whisper was easily caught by the room. "Her siblings are in the nursery. One of the staff will console Jana," Khan declared, his voice dangerously level. Alpha Khan, sir," Sahaina stammered. The children were moved to an adjoining room. Nima didn't wait. Her chair scraped back with a harsh screech as she bolted for the door. Her siblings were her priority, her only world. But before she could cross the threshold, Khan's thick fingers clamped around the nape of her neck. He yanked her back, the impact jarring the fresh scars on her spine. "I ordered them to stay in the nursery, Nima," he husked into her ear. His baritone sent a sickening mix of fear and traitorous arousal down her spine. You wouldn't disobey me, would you? He knew she had. By moving them to the blue room, she had directly contradicted his command. In his current state, fueled by the challenge from Victus and his own rising bloodlust, it was the final straw. He didn't want a conversation. He wanted blood. Con, I told you last night, she whimpered, but he gripped her tighter, dragging her down the corridor. Her small legs scrambled to keep up with his brutal pace. Please, you're hurting me, she cried, but he was gone, lost to the beast. He flung her into their quarters with such force that she skidded across the floor. The room was silent save for his heavy, ragged breathing. I do not know what to do with you, he gritted out, his eyes glowing a menacing, iridescent red. It is like you enjoy challenging me. He grabbed her by the hair and threw her onto the bed, ripping the red silk of her dress away. Nima quivered, trying to shuffle back, her voice failing her. He was no longer a man. He was a wolf in a human skin, and he wanted her to submit. His claws left red lashes on her ankles as he dragged her to the foot of the bed. He pinned her down, his snout nuzzling her mouth, his canines tearing into her lips until she tasted copper. He growled against her skin, a constant, terrifying vibration that made her stiffen in terror. He wasn't looking for her pleasure or her comfort. He was a predator claiming his territory. His jaw clamped onto her chest, biting into her skin as if she were a toy. Nima fought the scream in her throat, ball rising as the pain radiated through her limbs. She lay there, covered in her own blood, waiting for the end. Finally, the weight lifted. Through watery eyes, she saw his snout recede, replaced by his human face, now smeared with her blood. He stared at her with jet-black eyes, took in her shivering, broken form, and then barreled out of the room. A mournful howl echoed through the halls as he left. The protective bubble. When she was sure he was gone, the sobs finally broke free. Nima lay in the spot where she had bled, her composure shattered. She had seen the truth behind the mask. He was a beast, and there was no light left in him. She staggered to the bathroom, finding a robe to cover her battered body. She didn't look in the mirror. She didn't want to see the disfigured version of herself. Wiping her torn mouth, she walked into the adjoining room. She found Jana red-faced and sniffling in the arms of a bleary-eyed Calum. Oh, my babies, Nima sobbed, her voice husky. Jana had been crying for her mama all night, her own small heartbreak echoing Nima's. Nima climbed into the bed, gathering them both into her arms. She placed Calum's head on her chest, ignoring the sting of the wounds there. His steady heartbeat and Jana's small hiccups were the only things that mattered. She wrapped the blankets around them, creating a protective bubble against the world outside. She would take anything Khan threw at her, the pain, the humiliation, the blood, as long as she could stay with them. Their heartbeats were the only music her weathered soul had left. Chapter 13. When Nima woke the next morning, her siblings were still fast asleep. Calum was sprawled across the bed while Jana lay in a tight, protective ball. Their soft huffs of breath were the only thing that drowned out the throbbing in Nima's chest. The wound had stopped bleeding during the night, but it remained a fierce, deep gouge on her left breast. Wincing, she climbed out of bed. Every part of her protested. Her back felt rubbed raw, her thighs were tender and bruised, and her swollen lips still carried the metallic tang of blood. She moved into the room she had shared with Khan, a room she vowed never to sleep in again. To her disgust, the bloody sheets had already been replaced. The bed was made as if the violence of the previous night had never happened. Maybe to Khan, it hadn't. She retreated into the bathroom and started the water. She avoided the mirrors, not wanting to see the art Khan had painted on her skin in shades of purple, black, and red. Sinking into the tub, she watched as the water turned a pale, streaky pink. She pulled the band from her hair and submerged herself completely. Under the surface, the world went quiet. She let the oxygen ebb from her muscles, her heart slowing as she hovered in the silence of the deep. She stayed until her lungs convulsed with the desperate need to breathe, drifting toward the brink of unconsciousness where she thought she heard a door bang and a distant howl. Suddenly, rough hands grabbed her shoulders and hauled her to the surface. Nima spluttered and coughed, air rushing back into her lungs with painful force. She looked up to find Khan sitting by the tub, half wet and looking wild-eyed with terror. "You tried to kill yourself?" he growled, his voice hoarse and panicked. Nima felt a jagged laugh tear from her throat. Tears prickled her eyes as she shook with bitter humor. "I was cleansing," she choked out. "Do you think I am stupid?" "I forbid it," Khan bellowed. He looked distraught, his hair messy and dark circles under his eyes as if he hadn't slept. Nima took a dark pleasure in his dishevelment. "Only you're allowed to try and kill me, Khan. Isn't that right?" She stood up, purposefully walking past him so he had to see every inch of his handiwork. The blotches of blue and purple, the angry red marks. She bore her body like a canvas of his sins before wrapping herself in a fresh robe. The wolf and the lamb. In the kitchen, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Nima watched her siblings eat cereal, their faces smeared with milk, while Sahaina hovered nearby. "Maybe you should head to the infirmary," Sahaina whispered, her eyes darting to Nima's chest. "To make sure nothing is infected." Nima nibbled on a croissant, her hand instinctively hovering over her wounded chest. The wound was weeping, and a sour smell had begun to cling to her skin. Before she could respond, the air in the room shifted. Khan swaggered in, leaning against the counter. "Can!" Jana screamed. To Nima's horror, the toddler scrambled down and flew across the room, clinging to Khan's legs. "Jana, come back and eat," Nima pleaded, her voice wavering. She watched as Khan lifted the girl, Jana's small fingers tracing the scars on his face while she babbled about beasts and monsters. Nima's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't trust him to hold the girl, not after what he'd done to her. "Sahaina, stay with the children," Khan commanded. "I am walking with my mate." Once they were in the corridor, Nima spun on him. "Don't you ever touch my siblings again. You can't be trusted." Khan crowded her against the wall, his body vibrating with a familiar, dangerous energy. "I won't hurt them, Nima. And I won't hurt you." Nima didn't believe him. She followed him through the maze of corridors back to the infirmary. There, she was met by a blonde doctor named Emmeline. Khan demanded Nima be treated and then vanished, leaving the two women alone. Emmeline was factual but kind. She didn't ask questions about the bruises. The lack of shock on her face told Nima that she had seen many victims of a wolf's rage before. "I find that making a reference to future heirs often stops a wolf's inclination to act wild," the doctor remarked dryly as she prepared a numbing paste. Nima watched as the doctor used a specialized incubator. Blue laser lights roamed over her skin, knitting the flesh back together and replacing dead cells with new ones. When it was over, the deep wound was gone, replaced by a slightly raised, permanent scar. It was a mark of ownership born of anger, not love. As Nima buttoned her jumpsuit, she felt a new, cold determination. She had his mark on her body now. She wanted to give him one of his own. Chapter 14. Remain strong, Nima. This too shall pass. Emmeline's words echoed in Nima's mind as she stood on the other side of the infirmary door. The young doctor had offered a play date for their children, a gesture of friendship that Nima had reluctantly accepted. She wasn't sure if she was ready to let anyone in, especially not someone who might poke at the fresh trauma of her mating, but for Calum and Jana, she would endure the small talk. She was mentally rebuilding her walls when Sahaina appeared, her face pale and her breathing shallow. "Nima, Khan sent me to get you," she whispered, her eyes darting around in fear. Nima froze. Sahaina was alone. No babbling Jana, no quiet Calum. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced her chest. She didn't wait for an explanation. She bolted down the corridor, her weak body finding a sudden, desperate reserve of energy. She skidded into Khan's office, Sahaina trailing breathlessly behind. The scene inside was a jarring juxtaposition of domesticity and power. Jana was perched on the back of Khan's chair, her tiny hands twisting his dark, silky hair into knots as she styled it. Calum was sitting right on Khan's lap, leaning over the desk to watch the alpha write. Slowly, Khan grumbled, though his lips tilted into a smug smirk when he saw Nima. He was gloating. In just a few hours, he had charmed the children who were her entire world. The very man who had treated their mama like a conquest. Calum looked up, his hazy blue eyes wide. He hopped off Khan's lap and ran halfway to Nima before doubling back to grab a piece of paper. He thrust it into her hands, his eyes fixated on the floor in typical anxious fashion. Nima looked down at the drawing. It was their family, her parents, her lost sister Lara, and the children. But there, standing tall to the left, was Khan. Calum had included the wolf as if he were their protector, not their captor. "It's beautiful, Calum," she murmured, her heart breaking. Calum was too young to understand that this serpent had slithered into their lives and taken everything. Khan was a divide and conquer personified. He would mimic a vine in her garden, providing support until they least expected it, then he would strike. "Come on, Jana. Climb down, monkey," Nima prompted, her voice tight. "Where are you going?" Khan's voice was hard, a demand for submission. To find the girl who took care of them, Nima snapped, refusing to seek his permission. "I know where she resides," he offered, a Cheshire cat grin spreading across his face. "I will tell you if you do me a favor." Nima didn't even blink. "Don't need you. I have Carson." She turned her back on his furious expression and marched out. The butterfly in the garden. Nima met Carson outside the nursery. He looked nervous, his fingers twiddling with impatience. He was clearly intimidated by the memory of Khan's territorial display at dinner, and Nima wondered if she could truly trust a brother of the beast. But for today, they were using each other. He led her through a maze of identical, nude-colored corridors that seemed designed to strip away a prisoner's sense of direction. Finally, they reached a set of tall iron doors. "It's for their protection," Carson explained, pressing a button on a security screen. "We keep the young females away from their mates. A lot of wolves don't appreciate that." The doors were opened by a woman as sturdy as an oak tree, who ushered them into a surprisingly tranquil living area. The room was decorated in beige and gold, filled with the scent of incense and the sight of girls lingering on a patio. "Her name is Vanya," Carson whispered, nodding toward a girl sitting alone under a wide oak tree. "It means butterfly." Nima watched as Carson approached the girl, his stilted conversation proving just how awkward he felt. Nima set Jana down near Calum and walked toward the tree. "Vanya." The young girl's head snapped up. Her clear blue eyes filled with tears as she recognized Nima. She didn't hesitate. She flittered forward like her namesake and threw her arms around Nima's shoulders, sobbing into her neck. "I'm so glad you came," Vanya choked out, her shoulders shaking with the release of her terror. "I didn't want to be alone." Nima held her tight, feeling the girl's fragility. In a world of wolves and vipers, the butterflies had to stick together. Chapter 15. Vanya was no longer alone. Though Nima could do nothing to liberate the girl from the protective cell for teenagers, she visited every day. They shared meals and walked the corridors, their friendship hardening into a bond of sisterhood forged in the darkest hours of their lives. Vanya had seen the whippings. She had seen the world break. If she hadn't been there for Nima's siblings during those first horrific hours, Nima wasn't sure any of them would have survived mentally. But while the light of day brought companionship, the night brought the monsters. Sleep had become an enemy. For Nima, every time she closed her eyes, she saw Khan's snout dripping with her blood. She would wake gasping, the phantom pain of his teeth against her skin enough to keep her heart racing until dawn. But the true tragedy was Jana. The 2-year-old was withering. The memories of the whipping post and the screams of the village raid had taken root in her young mind like a rot. Every night, Jana fought sleep as if it were a parasite. She would work herself into a frenzy, her anxiety turning to a volatile rage directed at her own golden skin. Nima had to watch, helpless, as her little sister scratched at her own arms and legs, sobbing until her voice was a hoarse whisper. The family was spiraling. Despite the abundance of food, they looked like the living dead, with deep circles under their eyes and skin that had reverted to a pale, malnourished hue. They were ghosts haunting a palace. Desperate, Nima decided to swallow her pride. She led her exhausted siblings down the hall toward a play date with Emmeline's children. She needed help. She couldn't raise them alone in this darkness, and she hoped the doctor might have an answer. Cracks in the glass. Nima sat on the edge of the playground, watching Calum and Jana play with Emmeline's boys. Under the sun, they looked almost normal, but Nima knew better. The blissful light of day was just a temporary mask. They will be fine in no time, Emmeline said, stepping up beside her. They just need to adjust. The dam finally broke. Years of being the protector, of losing her parents, then her sister Lara, and then her own dignity to a wolf, came crashing down. Tears streamed down Nima's face. It's just so hard, Nima husked. I feel like we'll never be happy. Like we're destined to struggle forever. Is it wrong to want more? She felt herself disintegrating. She had been strong for so long, but 1 week in this compound had decimated her will. The luxuries meant nothing while her family's hearts were withering. I know it's hard, Emmeline said softly, pulling Nima into a supportive embrace. But you need to persevere. And maybe Khan can help. Nima stiffened. The name felt like ash in her mouth. She pulled back, her eyes wide with disbelief and rising fury. Khan? Fucking Khan, who tore at my skin like it was paper? The rage moved through her like a physical strike. She thought of Khan's father, the man who ordered the whippings. She thought of Khan, who had separated her from her siblings when they needed her most. He was the root of the poison in their veins. I won't ask that much for anything. Nima spat, the words hitting Emmeline like a blow. She stood abruptly, her fists clenched. She didn't need the man who had broken her to be the one to fix her family. She had raised them without him, protected them from the world while he lived in his high castle, and she would find a way to save Jana without his blood-stained hands. She marched into the play area, gathered her siblings, and left. She didn't need him. She would never need him. Chapter 16. Nima stood before the adjoining door, her pride a heavy weight in her chest. But Jana was withering, Calum was retreating into a silent shell, and she was breaking. She didn't wait for an answer before pushing the door open. Khan was half-naked and slumberous, his eyes flickering from hazel to a predatory amber as he took her in. Nima didn't flinch. I need your help. I can't do this anymore, she whispered, her eyes raw from sleeplessness. She expected a price. She expected a demand. Instead, the alpha simply stood, grabbed a shirt, and followed her into the blue room. The transformation was immediate. Khan didn't plead with Jana or hover tentatively. He commandeered the space. When Jana, lost in a sudden fit of terror, lashed out and scratched Calum's face, Khan didn't hesitate. He didn't soothe her, he roared. That is enough, Jana. You do not hit your brother. His voice ricocheted off the walls, silencing the room instantly. Nima started to intervene, terrified he was being too harsh, but he shushed her with a single look. He knelt by the bed, pulling the trembling toddler toward him. Monster, Jana sobbed, her tiny thumb in her mouth. There is no monster that can get you, Jana, Khan said, his voice dropping to a low, steady baritone. He looked her dead in the eye, speaking a truth that made Nima's skin crawl. Because I am the biggest and scariest monster of them all. All the others are too scared of me to hurt you. I will protect you. You monster? Jana asked, tilting her head. Yes, Ladybug. I am a monster, but I am yours. Now get to bed. Within minutes, the child who hadn't slept in a week was fast asleep. Nima was left to clean Calum's bleeding cheek, stunned by the efficiency of the beast. Khan was a monster, indeed, the only one that appeared in Nima's own nightmares, but for her siblings, he had become a shield. The cost of silence. The next morning, Nima felt a lightness she hadn't known in days. They had all slept. She knew she owed Emmeline an apology for her outburst at the playground, so she sought the doctor out near the nursery. I'm sorry, Emmeline, Nima said, her brown eyes searching for a truce. I was wrong for speaking to you like that. Emmeline didn't immediately soften. She looked tired, her blonde hair messy. I understand your distress, Nima, but I will not have you using derogatory terms like mutts around my children. My mate and my sons are wolves. I love them. The apology quickly dissolved into a bitter debate. Emmeline argued that the world wasn't black and white, that humans were capable of evil and wolves were capable of good. You are naive if you believe otherwise, she snapped. I know humans aren't perfect, Nima growled, her frustration boiling over. But humans respect the word no. If I don't want something, they don't force it. Emmeline's face turned a blotchy, furious red. What world are you living in? Humans slither right under that word. I am a wolf lover because my mate saved me from human men who would have raped me. At least human rape is condemned. Nima spat, her voice turning eerie and calm. Which wolf condemns it? Your beloved mate? Did he speak up when Khan plundered my body in front of the whole pack? I bet the number of women raped by humans is a fraction of the females forced into mating on the day I was taken. The words hung in the air, cold and undeniable. According to global crime statistics, while sexual violence is a pervasive human issue, it is a documented reality that in many conflict zones or high-tension societies, the reported rates of sexual assault can escalate significantly during periods of forced displacement or raids. In human history, it is estimated that roughly 1 in 3 women worldwide have been subjected to physical or sexual violence, but in the specific context of the mating rituals Nima described, where consent is bypassed entirely by a biological or social mandate, the rate within that event is effectively 100%. Emmeline's eyes glazed over, a buried memory surfacing. It's not the same, she whispered, her voice trembling. I grew to love him. It was my choice. Rape is rape, Nima finalized, looking at the defeated woman. You've just been taught to accept it. I never will. Nima turned and walked away, leaving Emmeline standing in the quiet nursery. She had come to mend a friendship, but instead, she had stripped away the illusions the doctor used to survive. Love, Nima knew, shouldn't require you to forget how it started. True love was open and aware. It was forgiving, yes, but it wasn't blind. Chapter 17. A couple of days later, Nima sat in the library with Jana and Calum. She was helping Calum with his reading and Jana with the alphabet. In the underground villages, resources for learning were scarce. Most didn't bother, as survival took precedence over literacy. But Nima's mother had been different. She believed reading was the key to humanity, a way to learn from the past so as not to repeat it. Nima often pondered the history they were taught. The tales said the old world ended a millennium ago when werewolves, struggling to procreate amongst themselves, sought to enslave humans. A war followed, the wolves won, and humanity was cast into the shadows. Nima doubted the fanciful, human version was entirely accurate, but the reality of their hardship was undeniable. Her thoughts were interrupted by Calum, who was stuck on a word in an old, dusty copy of Winnie the Pooh. Use your phonics, Calum, she encouraged. Yeah, oh. RRR. Your? He asked. Well done, she beamed. It was a rare, beautiful moment of normalcy until the door slammed open. Khan stood there, broad-shouldered and scowling. Nima reflexively tucked Calum behind her, standing to meet his gaze. She expected another battle, but Khan looked nervous. He scratched the back of his neck, a tell she'd noticed in Carson, too. Nima, you and your siblings are to meet my future pack tonight, he muttered before stomping back out. The new Alpha's pack. Hours later, Nima stood in the Great Hall, her nerves skyrocketing. She wore a cobalt blue dress, choosing a style that covered the scars on her chest. Beside her, Khan looked every bit the alpha in black leather, his face set in a fierce mask. The hall was filled with hundreds of wolves. The atmosphere was primal. Males were sparring in the center of the room, spilling blood to show their strength to potential partners, while wolves could only mate with their true matches, usually humans. They still engaged in casual relationships within the pack, fights of instinct to prove who was the top dog. Khan leaned in to kiss her cheek. Nima flinched, a move that made his jaw tighten. He grabbed her neck, pulling her close enough to smell his scent. Don't flinch away, he rumbled, his voice a low warning. It gets me mad, and you don't like me mad. She forced herself to relax as he lingered against her skin. To his pack, he was a strong, fair leader. To her, he was a monster who treated her family better than he treated her. It confused her. He acted as if she were merely a vessel for his heir, while showing her siblings a warmth he denied her. A scarred wolf approached, bowing his head in respect. "Alpha, we were wondering when the next hunt will be scheduled. Our wolves grow restless." "There is no opportune time," Khan stated firmly. "We have humans who have not been situated, many of whom have not participated in the mate trials." The mention of the trials piqued Nima's curiosity. Once the wolves left, she turned to Khan. "What are the mate trials?" Khan's lip tilted into a smirk. "It is when you humans think you have married for life, and we show you how wrong you are. We take back our mates, and we kill the competition." The reality of the trials. The mate trials were a brutal tradition where humans were given a fair chance to fight for their spouses. In reality, it was a slaughter. Most humans opted out, knowing they couldn't stand against a werewolf. However, history recorded a few anomalies. The statistics of these trials were grim. Success rate: humans won less than 2% of recorded trials. Outcome: over 90% of human participants were killed or permanently maimed during the challenge. Rare victories: one legendary human female won by ripping a she-wolf's throat out with her bare teeth, a story that still whispered through the villages as a sign of human defiance. Nima felt a chill. The order Khan promised was built on the wreckage of human families. As she looked at her siblings, she realized the compound wasn't just a home, it was a cage where the rules of the old world were being systematically erased. Chapter 18. Khan's pack was a reflection of the man himself, carnal, bloodthirsty, and in their absolute prime. These were not the docile wolves of the old stories. They were a legion that accepted no weakness. Khan knew their restlessness was a ticking time bomb. The upcoming mate trials would act as a temporary bomb for their hunger, but a hunt was inevitable. Nima sat at the long table, a solitary figure between two worlds, while the children, human and wolf alike, played with an innocent disregard for species. The she-wolves were not so kind. What began as snickering from a trio of females soon swelled into a horde of 6, their laughter sharp and mocking. She saw Khan standing back, his arms folded. He wasn't going to intervene. In the pack hierarchy, an alpha's mate isn't given her rank, she must seize it. This was Nima's trial. If she failed, she would be a pariah. If she succeeded, she would be their Luna. Nima rose, the adrenaline already humming in her veins. She strode toward the group of cackling females. "What's the joke?" "I want to laugh, too," she interrupted. The laughter died, then spiked again, higher and more insulting. They whispered behind their hands about her uncultured, human ways. Nima didn't strike immediately. She waited, luring the ringleader out. "Well, speak up," she jeered. "I'm told I have an excellent sense of humor." The crowd parted, and the real wolf emerged. Her name was Lian. She was tall, with thick black hair and a piercing, exotic stare that sought to dwarf Nima. Without a word of warning, Lian's body blurred into motion. A fist connected with Nima's jaw, the brute strength of the she-wolf sending her staggering. The pack immediately formed a circle, howling and drooling for the carnage. Nima spat blood and centered herself. She was a trained fighter, and she wouldn't let this predator take her pride. The duel of the Luna. The fight was a blur of calculated violence. Lian used her reach to rain down blows, but Nima was statuesque, waiting for the opening. The counter: Nima arched her foot, catching Lian in the stomach and sending her reeling. The struggle: Lian recovered, her claws grazing Nima's skin as they grappled. Nima's mouth filled with the coppery taste of her own blood. The turning point. As Lian lunged, Nima dropped her guard to bait a punch, then countered with a fist that drew the first red from the she-wolf's face. In a move of sheer desperation and skill, Nima grabbed a fistful of Lian's black hair and drove the woman's face into her knee. When Lian tried to drag her to the floor, Nima twisted, wrapping her arms around Lian's leg. Crack. The sound of shattering bones silenced the room. Lian crumbled, her white bone protruding through the skin of her leg. The pack held its breath. Finish it, a voice whispered. Then it grew into a roar. Kill her. Finish it. Nima looked at the bloodthirsty crowd. They wanted an execution. She marched over to the whimpering Lien and yanked her head back by the hair, baring the she-wolf's neck. Nima could feel Khan's gaze burning into her back. She tightened her grip, then bellowed over the crowd. Her death is not needed when I have her submission. Lien's eyes dropped to the floor, her body trembling in total defeat. Nima released her and walked through the crowd. Wolves who had mocked her moments ago now lowered their shoulders or offered their necks in respect. The Luna rising. Khan was standing on a table, his eyes pitch black with arousal and pride. He gripped Nima's waist and hauled her up beside him, his snout pressing into her neck to drink in the scent of her victory, a cocktail of sweat and blood. This is Nima, Khan howled, his voice vibrating through the hall. My mate and your Luna. The pack erupted. The chant of Luna, Luna, echoed off the stone walls as wolves shifted into their half-forms, their howls a deafening acknowledgement of her power. As Nima stood beside the king of this den, she felt a hollow victory. She had proven she was a wolf among sheep, but she knew the truth of the species she now led. She had spared Lien, choosing submission over death, a human mercy. But as the mate trials loomed, she knew the real wolves wouldn't be so kind to the humans who dared to stand against them. In the den of the wolves, mercy was a foreign tongue. Chapter 19. Back again. Emmeline mumbled, her eyes cataloging the fresh damage. Nima's cheek was swollen, her lip cracked, and her skin a map of deepening blues and purples. Yep, but you'll be glad to know it wasn't Khan this time, Nima replied. The air between them was still thick with the residue of their last argument. Emmeline moved in silence, crushing flower petals and mixing them with a yellowish liquid and colored dust. She set the mixture aflame, waiting for a purple haze to rise before applying the warm paste to Nima's face. Emmeline, I'm sorry about the other day, Nima whispered. But I had to tell you the truth. Emmeline's hands trembled against the desk. I don't hate you, she said, her voice cracking. But when I got home, I had to look at my mate and know my son wasn't conceived out of love. It hurt. It still does. She looked up, a new lightness in her eyes. But I choose him now. You gave me a choice I didn't know I had. Thank you. Nima felt a surge of respect. Emmeline was no longer a wolf lover out of ignorance. She was a realist. So Emmeline sighed, dabbing at the paste. Tell me why you're always bruised. Nima leaned back and began the long story of the fight with Lien, the price of being a Luna. The red rose. Later, Khan summoned Nima from the nursery. He led her to a secluded garden maze, the walls bursting with vibrant blooms. Nima plucked a red rose, its petals still tightly closed, shielding its center from the world. I wanted to spend time with you without distractions, Khan said, his hazel eyes dry and uninviting. I don't want to be alone with you. You can't be trusted, Nima snapped, crushing the rose in her fist. The petals fell like drops of blood. Get used to it. How else will you give me an heir? The coldness of his demand lit a fire in her. You'd better hope I'm already pregnant, because you aren't touching me again. I deserve better than a cruel legacy. Khan's face darkened, his canines descending into a snarl. You have too much pride. It's that human pride that ended your civilization. Pride? Nima laughed harshly. You're an arrogant twat, Khan. Try to touch me and see what happens. The alpha loomed over her, his voice a low, rattling growl. I crush resistant humans with my pinky finger. This is my world, Nima. Don't make threats to me. You expect sex, but you can't even apologize, she yelled, her arms flailing in exasperation. I cannot show shame for who I am, Khan replied, as if an apology were a foreign concept. He looked at her as if she were the one with the screw loose for wanting basic human decency. To him, respect was a birthright. To Nima, it was earned. The promise of an ocean. I will not accept your world, Khan, Nima growled. I'll knock it down and build my own within these prison walls. Khan's body straightened, radiating a terrifying dominance. I could take your siblings away on a whim. If that's what it takes to show you I am your alpha, I will do it. That is a promise. Nima felt the air turn cold. She knew he liked the children, but she also knew they were his only leash on her. You take them from me, she whispered, her voice steady and lethal, and I will kill you, Khan. I will drink your blood to make sure you're really dead. Silence fell. For the first time, Khan looked at her not as a conquest, but as an equal in ferocity. A small, uncharacteristic smirk touched his lips. You are a good match for me. Unfucking likely, she grumbled, though the immediate threat had passed. I never meant to treat you that way, he offered, a weak, pitiful attempt at an apology. But this is the world I live in. There are no rose-tinted glasses here. Just a red haze of blood. Nima accepted the words, but not the man. A mental scar ran deeper than the one on her chest. She realized then that her family was like a single body. If she bled, they bled. They were all organs fighting to survive, pumping the same rose-tinted blood that Khan so desperately wanted to claim. Chapter 20. To survive among wolves, Nima had learned one universal truth. She had to be a threat. Winning the fight against Lien had elevated her from a sewage dweller to the Luna of the pack, but outside Khan's den, she was still a target. To remedy this, she had turned to Carson. Her training with the blonde wolf served two purposes. It sharpened her own skills and pulled Carson out of the pit of self-pity he'd been wallowing in. Be a man. Be a wolf, she had challenged him. The words had been a spark. Within a week, Carson was transformed. He was still thin, but he was fast, lightning fast. Watching him spar with the warriors, Nima felt a rare sense of accomplishment. Beside her, Vanya watched Carson with a quiet, budding adoration that Nima found both sweet and protective. For a moment, in the hidden training rooms and secret trips to the lush confectionery kitchen, life almost felt like a choice. But peace was a fragile glass in a house of hammers. The spark of jealousy. Nima and Carson were panting on the training floor, laughing after a particularly grueling wrestling match. Nima had Carson in a headlock, and in their struggle to untangle, they toppled over in a heap of wild limbs and breathless giggles. Well, this is cozy, a voice boomed from above. The laughter died instantly. Khan stood in the doorway, his ink-black hair in disarray, his jaw ticking with a murderous rhythm. To an alpha, the sight of his mate laughing on the floor with another man, even his own brother, was a declaration of war. Khan, please. We were just training, Nima started, scrambling to her feet. Shut up, female. Khan bellowed. I will deal with you later. Little brother, let's fight like real wolves. Carson stood his ground. He knew he was no match for an alpha, but he chose the dignity of a beating over the cowardice of a retreat. It wasn't a fight, it was an execution. Carson managed to dodge 3 blows before Khan grew bored. He caught Carson by the throat, lifting him off the ground until the younger wolf's face turned a blotchy purple. Stop. He can't breathe. Nima screamed, but she was pinned back by one of Khan's loyal sentinels. Khan threw Carson across the room like a rag doll, then followed up with 2 brutal punches that left Carson coughing blood onto the floor. The moment the sentinel released her, Nima was at Carson's side, her tears mixing with the blood on his face. This was the final insult to Khan. To see her comfort his mistake of a brother over him triggered a primal detonation. He grabbed Nima, dragging her out of the room as she kicked and screamed. When he finally threw her into their bedroom, the echoes of their first night together filled the air. The midshift duel. Khan stood by the door, licking a trail of blood from his lip where Nima had headbutted him. He was shifting, not fully, but into a hulking, mid-transition form. His muscles swelled, his canines pushed through his lips, and his eyes leaked a terrifying, hellish red. You humiliated me, he growled, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. You took his side. Nima didn't cower. She didn't plead. She dropped into a fighting stance, her eyes narrowing as she analyzed his new form. In this midshift state, he was stronger and more durable, but he was also bulkier, sloppy. He would be slower than the man and less instinctive than the wolf. She saw the opening. She saw the beast. And for the first time, she wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting for the satisfaction of seeing him bleed. "Come on then, you monster," she whispered, her voice a sharp contrast to his guttural growls. "Let's see if you can handle a human who isn't afraid of you anymore." She was optimistic. She was cunning. And as Khan lunged, Nima moved with the grace of a woman who had nothing left to lose and a scar that needed company. Chapter 21. Standing by the door, Khan watched Nima's defenses rise. He had spent weeks trying to be human for her, trying to forge a bond through forced walks and subtle touches. But her defiance over Carson had shattered his control. To an alpha, kindness was a gift that, if disrespected, was replaced by cruelty. "Carson is the loveliest man I have ever met," Nima shouted, her voice echoing with a reverence that felt like acid in Khan's veins. "I wish I wasn't your mate," she finalized. The words were a switch. Khan went feral. He charged, a blur of muscle and rage. Nima ducked, but his claws found the tender skin of her calf, tearing through muscle. In a desperate bid for survival, Nima became the animal. She sank her teeth into his forearm, ripping flesh as he pulled away. The sight of his own blood, drawn by a weak human, snapped the last of Khan's sanity. The man was gone. Only the beast remained, chanting a single command: kill. The silver sting. Khan moved with predatory speed, his thick fingers closing around Nima's throat. He lifted her off the ground, squeezing until the world began to dim into a black haze. Her lungs burned, her heart slowed. "You stood no chance," he sneered, his canines grazing her cheek. But Nima was not the weepy girl from the first night. Her hand slid into her pocket, gripping the silver knife she had stolen from the kitchen. With a final surge of strength, she drove the blade into his arm. Khan recoiled, genuine shock crossing his face. No wolf drew blood from him, yet here was a human with a silver blade and fire in her eyes. Nima stood, gasping for air, the knife steady in her hand. She had realized that weakness earned no mercy from Khan, only strength and a bit of cunning would suffice. The fight resumed, but it was a dance of shadows. Nima used her training, ducking and twisting, her knife nicking his skin in a dozen shallow cuts of defiance. Khan was a whirlwind of rage, but his movements were sloppy, fueled by bloodlust rather than strategy. An eye for an eye. They collided, a mass of tangled limbs and sweat, crashing onto the bed. Khan pinned her, the weight of his body crushing her legs. He tore the knife from his arm and held it to her throat, his blood dripping onto her skin. "I could cut you," he hummed, his voice a low, melodic growl. "But you look so tempting with that fire in your eyes." The violence shifted. The adrenaline and anger curdled into a dark, carnal passion. He licked the blood from her lip. She gripped his hair with a force meant to scalp him. Their mouths fought for dominance, biting and nibbling in a dance that was as much a battle as the one that preceded it. Nima straddled him, her hands peppering kisses across his scarred chest. She looked down at him, a smirk playing on her lips. "What have you done to me?" Khan slurred, his eyes growing hazy, his body suddenly heavy and shaking. His organs felt as if they were grinding to a halt. "Wolfsbane," she breathed against his ear. In the right doses, it was a healer's tool. In the dose Nima had coated her silver knife with, it was a paralyzing poison. She had stolen it from Emmeline's office, knowing the day would come when the beast would need to be put down. "You shouldn't have started what you could never finish," she whispered, her body still rocking against his as he drifted into a delirious stupor. She climbed off the bed, leaving the great alpha lying in a pool of his own blood and sweat. She picked up her knife, wiped it clean, and tucked it back into her pocket. She leaned over him, placing a mocking kiss on his forehead. "Sleep well," she threw over her shoulder as she sauntered out. The tables had turned. Khan would wake up feeling like death, his arrogance humbled by the gutter rat who had outmaneuvered him. He would finally know how it felt to have his chest ripped apart and his world silenced. Chapter 22. Khan woke to a world of shivering cold and agonizing pressure. His heart felt as though it were clamped in a vice, each beat a heavy, painful throb that echoed in his skull. As his bleary eyes adjusted to the darkness, he realized his body was slick with cold sweat. The drug, whatever it was still a war in his veins. He managed to pull himself upright, only to immediately heave the contents of his stomach onto the floor. Panting, he surveyed the room. It was transformed into a temporary infirmary, jars of pungent herbs, blood-stained rags, and a basin of water on his bedside table. The air carried the sharp scent of antiseptic and the lingering, sweet fragrance of Nima. Memories flitted through his mind like broken glass. He remembered an argument, a flash of silver, and then a delirious vision of a golden angel with brown eyes straddling him before the darkness took him. He staggered to the window, the frosty night air helping to dull the pounding in his head. A servant girl spotted him through the door, her eyes widening in terror before she bolted toward the kitchen. Khan sank into a high-backed chair, his breathing ragged. He had been bested. He didn't know who had done it, but as an alpha, he found himself begrudgingly admiring the cunning it took to lay him low. 2 days of silence. Nima had spent the last 48 hours in a state of hypervigilance. She felt no regret for poisoning him, but the sight of the mighty alpha turned a sickly, gaunt gray had triggered a nagging sense of guilt. She wasn't a murderer, and she had spent the last 2 nights fighting to keep him alive. The risk had been immense. If the pack knew their Luna had poisoned their alpha, she wouldn't last the hour. She had sworn Emmeline and Sahina to secrecy. Together, they had diverted the warriors at the door, claiming Khan was indisposed with his mate, while secretly administering charcoal, steam treatments, and syringes of dark gray liquid to combat the purple poison in his veins. Nima entered the room, the scent of sickness hitting her immediately. She pushed open the window, ignoring Khan's raspy protest. "I closed it for a reason," he whispered. He looked hollow. His skin was pasty, his eyes sunken. The drug made him unnaturally calm. A subduing effect that Nima knew wouldn't last. She approached him, running her fingers through his sweaty hair, massaging his scalp to ease the drug-induced pressure. Khan leaned into her touch, a low purr rumbling in his chest. But then his eyes sharpened. "Are you here to make sure you succeeded in killing me?" An impasse of wills. Nima froze, then turned away to fetch a glass of water. "Is this laced with wolfsbane as well?" he mocked, pushing the glass aside. "If I wanted you dead, you would be," Nima glared, forcing the water back toward his cracked lips. "Who do you think washed you? Who do you think bandaged you while your pack was beating down the door?" Khan studied her. He realized now that she was the one who had drawn his blood and the one who had saved him. "Why heal me when you tried to kill me?" he asked, his voice thick with derision. "Do you think I will be indebted to you?" "No," Nima replied firmly. "I didn't want to kill you. I wanted to teach you a lesson. One I think you've learned." They were at a stalemate. Both had committed unforgivable acts. Nima had made it clear she would no longer be a victim. Khan could choose to retaliate publicly at the trials, or he could accept this violent truce. "Give me some water, little witch," he growled, the rumble turning into a cough. A ghost of a smile touched Nima's face as she helped him drink. The moment was interrupted by Emmeline, who swept into the room with a bag of supplies and a wicked gleam in her eyes. "Nice to see you still have your fire, Alpha Khan," the healer grinned, shutting the door firmly behind her. "You're going to need it. The trials begin in 36 hours. Chapter 23. Khan certainly had fire, but it was a cold, vengeful flame. He spent the first 24 hours of his recovery exploiting his weakness to keep Nima at his beck and call. He dictated every movement, demanding she bathe him, remake his bed, and massage his aching head. Nima complied, driven by the unspoken threat that if Khan didn't recover quickly, the fallout for her siblings would be catastrophic. By the next morning, the Alpha was back. Dressed in his signature black, his jaw ticking with a familiar fury, he stood tall. His gait was wobbly for only a moment before he forced himself into a stiff, overbearing posture. "I'll be in my office if you need me," he muttered, stalking out without a word of gratitude. Nima collapsed. She was beyond exhaustion, having survived on barely an hour of sleep while nursing her tormentor. She fell into a deep, dreamless slumber, only to be jolted awake by Sahina hours later. "Welcome to the land of the living," Sahina teased, handing her a muffin and orange juice. "It's 2 in the afternoon." Nima panicked, her eyes darting to the empty beds in the next room. "They're with Vanya," Sahina reassured her. "But Nima, look at you. You're shaking. You need an energizer." The medical truth. Nima dragged herself to the infirmary. She was at her breaking point. She needed more than just a nap to keep her siblings safe. Emmeline looked at her with a grim face, already preparing a syringe of blue liquid. "You look half dead," the healer noted. "Lie down. I need to run a full scan before I give you anything." The machine hummed, a blue laser trailing over Nima's skin, soothing her scars and pulling her into a trance-like state. For the first time in weeks, her body felt light, peaceful. Then, the alarm screamed. A red light flickered wildly, echoing through the small room like a siren. Nima sat up, her head spinning. What does that noise mean? Emmeline was staring at the screen, her mouth a hard line of apprehension. On the display, a red squiggle flashed erratically next to symbols that Nima couldn't decipher. "Emmeline? What is it?" The healer looked up, her face etched with worry. "That flashing red light, it means you're pregnant." The burden of the air. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Pregnant. Khan was finally getting his air. The child was conceived in violence and shadow, yet as Nima processed the news, her maternal instinct flared with a fierce, protective heat. This was her child first, and a wolf's legacy second. But the timing was a nightmare. Khan was still simmering with the humiliation of being poisoned. If he found out now, he would isolate her, perhaps even ship Calum and Jana away to protect the pregnancy from the chaos of their lives. He would turn her world into a gilded cage, and she wouldn't see her siblings for years. "I have to tell him," Nima whispered, "but not yet." "Nima, if he finds out you lied, he'll go crazy," Emmeline warned. "I just need a few days," Nima insisted, her stubbornness surfacing. "I need to get my strength back. I need him to see I can handle this and my siblings. If I tell him while he's still angry at me for the wolfsbane, he won't be rational." She needed to be the Luna the pack expected, but she also needed to be the sister her siblings required. In a few days, after the mate trials, maybe the world would be stable enough for a baby. Emmeline sighed, knowing there was no moving the stubborn human. She turned the screen toward Nima, a small, grainy image appearing amidst the data. "Forget about him for a second. Let's see this baby." Chapter 24. Nima moved through the compound in a trance. The news was a weight in her stomach, both literally and figuratively. She was to be the mother of Khan's heir. In just over 5 months, her family of 3 would become 4. Despite the violence that had conceived this child, Nima felt a fierce, burgeoning loyalty to the little ball of cells. It was hers. It was family. And she would secure its future with or without the alpha. By 5 o'clock, the energizer shot from Emmeline had taken full effect. She felt a surge of vitality she hadn't known in weeks. When she returned to her room, she was ambushed by Jana and Calum, their laughter and messy drawings acting as a balm to her frayed nerves. "Khan has invited all of you to dinner," Sahina announced, emerging from the bathroom. Nima sighed. Khan was back in control, calling shots and making demands. He wanted a show of unity, and Nima knew better than to refuse. The masquerade. Dinner required a transformation. The siblings were dressed in fine clothes, Calum in chinos and a shirt, his hair tied back like Khan's, Jana in a pink tutu. Nima traded her jumpsuit for a tight khaki dress that hugged her full hips, the low neckline a sharp contrast to her usual guarded appearance. When Khan arrived to collect them, Nima froze. He held Jana in his arms, laughing as the toddler nodded his long, black hair. His sharp eyes were soft, his smile mesmerizing. For a fleeting second, Nima saw the father he could be, and a flutter stirred deep in her womb. At the table, the atmosphere was almost familial. Khan's father engaged with Carson, whose new confidence was evident to everyone. Khan even asked Nima's opinion on their future territory. "I think my siblings and the The pup would enjoy the forest, Nima murmured, her cheeks flushing at the slip of the tongue. Khan's eyes darkened with a predatory delight. He leaned in, taking a deep, knowing whiff of her neck. He knew. The bond was singing the truth to him. The intruder. The peace was shattered by a loud, obnoxious voice. It would be a good place to raise pups, especially the brood Khan will be having. A man who looked like a leaner, a more feminine version of Khan, glided into the room. This was Ryan, Khan's rival brother. His gaze swept over Nima, lingering on her curves with a repulsive, leering hunger. "Brother," Ryan chuckled, his tongue licking his lip. "Your maid is looking delectable. And I have quite the appetite." Khan's body shifted, his claws descending. The air turned electric with hostility. Nima felt the urge to strike, but she felt Khan's hand grip hers not in a threat, but in a request for restraint. Nima took a breath and plastered a fake smile on her face. If they were to be a unit, she would play the part. "I always make an effort to please my mate," she chirped, her voice sweet as honey. She turned to Ryan with a faux innocent tilt of her head. "I'm sorry, was your name Brian? Khan only ever mentioned Carson. I see now why he forgot you." Khan's grip tightened, his eyes sparkling with pride. He pulled Nima toward him, crushing his lips against hers in a public display of ownership. Nima stiffened, her mind screaming in protest even as the mate bond sizzled at the contact. She bit his lip, drawing blood, a small act of rebellion that Khan only seemed to find more arousing. "As you can see," Khan growled at his brother, "my mate's efforts please me." Infuriated and humiliated, Ryan flung his chair across the room, the wood smashing against the wall as he stomped out of the hall. The scent of change. As the dinner resumed, a new scent drifted through the air, one that was not Nima's. While Nima smelled of honey and soft musk, this new aroma was dark, alluring, and heavy with vanilla. Khan's animalistic nature clawed at him to find the source. His hazel eyes traveled down the table until they met a pair of penetrating green ones. An auburn-haired female sat at the end of the table, her pale skin shimmering in the candlelight. She watched him with a look of unspoken promises. Khan's fingers were still tracing Nima's glowing skin, his lips still tasted of her blood, but the stranger's gaze held a different kind of pull. The little witch beside him had given him a scar and a child, but the woman at the end of the table was offering something else entirely. The game was changing, and the appetite of the pack was growing. Chapter 25. "Well, that was awkward," Nima mumbled as they retreated from the dining hall. Khan gave a non-committal grunt, his mind seemingly elsewhere, but Nima was too amped up to remain silent. "Why do you hate each other?" "Ryan, he's your brother." "It is the way it has been since he realized I was my father's heir and not him," Khan replied flatly. He explained the cold reality of wolf genetics. Ryan was the firstborn, but the product of a lesser pairing. Khan, born of a true mate connection, possessed the superior bloodline, the raw power of an alpha that age could never compensate for. To wolves, family was a hierarchy, not a sanctuary. "That's crazy," Nima countered, thinking of Calum. "He's my father's heir, but I don't love him any less. Legacy isn't worth hatred." "It is not the same," Khan dismissed. They reached the rooms in silence. Khan checked his watch, his eyes hardening. "Put them to bed. Come to my room. We have somewhere to be in 20 minutes. The Colosseum of Blood." Nima changed back into her standard jumpsuit, the khaki dress discarded like a skin she was glad to shed. She followed Khan out of the compound, through the barred gates, and into the dense, eerie forest. The path led to the ruins of a dead city, a skeletal landscape of glass and vine-choked concrete. In the heart of the rubble stood a structure that looked like a modern Colosseum. As they entered, a crescendo of howls nearly deafened her. This was the wolves' den. The pit below was spattered with the brown and red stains of old slaughter. Thousands of wolves filled the stands, their voices rising in a feral victory song. Khan led her to a cordoned-off section overlooking the arena. His eyes flashed red as he released a bone-shivering howl, echoed by the mass of predators. Then, the games began. It was a bloodbath. Humans, prisoners, rebels, verum resistentium, were forced into the pit with meager weapons. The first competitor, a tall white male with a machete, was torn apart by a wolf in third form before Nima could even process the horror. The wolf trotted to the edge of the pit and flung a piece of the man's torso toward Khan as an offering. Human blood sprayed through the air, coating Nima's skin, seeping into her pores. The metallic scent was cloying, the heat of the life force sickeningly warm. Nima's world tilted. She saw the lifeless blue eyes of a decapitated boy staring back at her. The face shifted, blurring into the image of her own father. Darkness descended. The brand of the Alpha. It is okay. Don't faint. Khan's voice was a low vibration against her ear. She woke with her head buried in his chest. His minty sent a fragile shield against the smell of death. He wiped the blood from her brow with a cool cloth, forcing her to stand tall. Look alive. These wolves thrive on weakness. Don't show any. The night was a blur of debauchery. As the sun began to rise, the atmosphere shifted from sexual frenzy to dark, focused energy. Khan released Nima and propelled himself over the wall into the pit. The stadium fell silent. We will annihilate these resistant humans until they realize they are at the bottom of the food chain. Khan roared. The gates opened. A large human male with wayward auburn hair and an axe stepped out. His blue eyes met Nima's, and a jolt of recognition, of shared humanity, hit her. Khan, she screamed, leaning over the railing. Don't you dare kill him. Don't you do it. Khan paused, glancing at her with a menacing grin before turning to his opponent. The fight was brutal, but Khan refused to shift. He fought as a man, using pure brawn to disarm the rebel. With a swift movement, Khan pinned him. Instead of a killing blow, Khan's claws sank into the man's chest, carving deep, jagged lines over his heart. 7 lines. 2 initials. KM. He didn't kill him, he branded him. A permanent reminder of who owned this territory. Khan kicked the sputtering man aside and climbed back to the veranda. He was covered in sweat and blood, his energy still humming with the thrill of the hunt. He leaned in, biting into Nima's neck, not in anger, but in a dark, possessive claim. You owe me, he grinned, his tongue tasting the salt and honey of her skin. You owe me a lot. Chapter 26. The walk back from the pit was a storm of adrenaline and fury. Nima's voice climbed in pitch as they reached the sanctuary of Khan's quarters. What the hell was that, Khan? You tried to kill Victus. I did not try, Khan growled, his jaw tightening. To a wolf of his lineage, failure in combat was a foreign concept. He hadn't failed to kill the rebel. He had chosen to spare him for a deeper, more agonizing brand. He didn't deserve that. I want to see him, Nima insisted, her frustration boiling into tears. She had watched humans, people who were just like her, be decapitated for sport. It was a vicious circle of inequality breeding violence, and she was trapped in the center of it. Not now, Nima, Khan warned, his body shuddering with a repressed, possessive rage. I am this close to tearing that male limb from limb. He is not your male. I am. He thumped his chest for emphasis, a primal display of dominance that silenced her. But the tension shifted as Khan's eyes narrowed with a different kind of interest. You owe me for sparing him. Let's discuss your debt. There won't be carte blanche, Nima snapped back, her posture mimicking his. I want to hear your terms. Khan paused, surprised by her use of the phrase. He was beginning to realize that Nima was more than a pretty face or a fertile vessel. She was educated, fierce, and constantly evolving. I want your undivided time, he finally said, his voice dropping an octave. Not these forced 2 hours. I want real intimacy. I want you to want to be with me. Nima let out a dry, harsh laugh. That's impossible. You repulse me. Khan's lips tilted into a cruel smirk. Don't lie. Your body tells me differently. This bond may force my hand, she countered, her eyes cold, but I don't want you. The reminder of their violent beginning flared Khan's nostrils. They had been together a month, and the only common language they shared was blood. Those are my terms, he finalized, slamming his bedroom door. There will be no middle ground. The library fortress. Hours later, Nima sat in the library, surrounded by a fortress of paper files. Sahina, Emmeline, Carson, and Vanya were all there, helping her sift through the manual records of human-wolf matings. They were looking for any sign of Lara. "He wants you to be willingly intimate?" Sahina growled, tossing a folder onto the table. "That wolf has a couple of screws loose." The group was a study in contradictions. Sahina, a civilian wolf with no beast to cloud her mind, saw Khan as a psychotic brute. Emmeline, ever the optimist, tried to find a silver lining. "Maybe this is his way of trying?" Emmeline suggested. "Look at his family, no offense, Carson, but they aren't exactly the loving type. Maybe he doesn't know how to be what you need." Carson looked down, his face morose. He knew the lack of love in the Manasseh household better than anyone. But it was Vanya's soft voice that cut through the noise. "I think you're luckier than most," the young girl whispered, her eyes wistful. "At least you have a mate who wants you. He's crazy, but he's crazy for you, not other females. Maybe you should talk to him about your fears." The impact of the 13-year-old's words hit Nima hard. She realized that while Khan was a monster, he was a monster focused entirely on her. "I cannot believe I was pro-Khan at the start of this month," Sahina grumbled, though her eyes were twinkling as Emmeline began to tease her about her own absent mate. The laughter that followed, the dirty jokes, the high fives, and the genuine warmth was the only thing keeping Nima sane. These people were turning a den of iniquity into a home. As the sun began to set on another day of the mating trials, Nima realized she had a choice to make. She was carrying his child, and her friends were right. The back and forth was tiring. Perhaps it was time to stop fighting the bond and start negotiating with the man. Chapter 27. Nima stood by the training mats, a swell of genuine pride warming her chest as she watched Carson. In less than a month, he had transformed. The lean, hesitant boy was gone, replaced by a man whose muscles rippled with every strike. He was agile, sturdy, and possessed a speed that left his opponents winded. When Carson caught a seasoned warrior in a headlock and brought him to the mat, Nima let out a piercing cheer. "Yeah," she screamed, living vicariously through him. Since discovering her pregnancy, she had benched herself from the more violent sparring, making Carson her emotional outlet. "I see you have improved, little brother," a deep voice rumbled. Khan stood at the edge of the mats, his leather trousers hugging thick legs, his shirt half-buttoned. He raked his fingers through his hair and, for the first time, gave Carson a look of pure, unadulterated approval. "Soon you will be better than me." The effect was instantaneous. Carson beamed, the bashful boy resurfacing for a moment under his brother's rare praise. Nima watched the exchange, realized that perhaps the wall between the brothers was finally crumbling. Khan caught Nima's eye and motioned her toward the door. She followed, her mind replaying the advice from the library. Maybe he's trying. The olive branch. Outside the training room, Nima turned to him with a genuine smile. "I don't think you understand what you've just done for him," she whispered. "I understand," Khan replied, stepping closer. He did something uncharacteristic. He took her hands in his. No sexual demand, no rough grip, just a steady, intimate hold. "But I did it for selfish reasons. I did it for you." Nima looked at his chest, avoiding his hazel gaze, but he tilted her chin up. "I'm tired of you looking at me like I am a lesser man because I cannot care for my brother. I see how you love your siblings. I know you expect that of me." He took a jagged breath, his fierce scar crinkling as his face softened into an expression of raw vulnerability. "I vow to you, Nima, that I will try to be the man you crave. As much of a man as the animal will allow. I am repulsed by the things I have done to you." The honesty was staggering. The monster was asking for a chance to be a man. Nima felt the war between her heart and mind reach a tentative ceasefire. She was tired of the fighting. She was tired of the blood. "I think we have a lot to discuss before I can trust that," she said frankly, "but let's talk. Properly." A new leaf. They walked to his private garden, a sanctuary of vibrant blues and pinks that finally overshadowed the constant red of the compound. Nima didn't waste time. "What caused this?" "The other day, you were demanding sex and ripping men to shreds." My methods have changed, not my heart, Khan admitted, leaning against the flower wall. I do not want to fight you anymore. We are mates, yet there is no love between us. It is my fault, and I am the one who must change. He looked at her, his eyes begging for a clean slate. I was not raised to be soft. I had no mother, and my father is no example of emotion. This kindness goes against everything I am, but for you, I will try. Is that enough? Nima looked at the man who had been her tormentor and saw a grieving child hidden beneath centuries of alpha pride. She let out a long, shaky sigh and stepped into his space, wrapping her arms around his sturdy frame. Khan melted into her. He buried his face in her shoulder, inhaling her honey scent as if it were oxygen. He peppered soft, brave kisses along her neck, his large fingers twirling her curls. The awkwardness vanished, replaced by a fragile peace. This still doesn't mean we're having sex, she grumbled into his skin. Khan's chest vibrated with a genuine, booming laugh. The first she had ever heard. Only you, Nima, he murmured. Only you. Chapter 28. The night was a symphony of cheers and predatory howls. The moon, shifting toward its full glory, hung in the sky as a silent witness to the pack's jubilation. The North was preparing for its new leader. Khan Manasseh, descendant of the first Wolfen brethren, was officially entering the first stages of his ceremony to become regional alpha. The compound had been transformed. The courtyard, once a place of human suffering, was now lit by towering torches that cast long, dancing shadows against the stone. Nima stood on the podium, her hair billowing in the cool night wind. She looked at Khan and felt a strange tug of pride. His wild, gnarling beard had been trimmed close to his face, making him look younger, more human, yet undeniably more dangerous. Tonight we hunt in honor of my son, the Alpha proclaimed, his gaze lingering on Nima with a widening smile. May our bonds always stay true. Khan pulled Nima into his heat, his strong arms chasing away her shivers. He peppered her skin with small kisses, his presence hypnotizing her as primitive drum beats pulsed through the air. For a moment, the violence of their past felt like a distant dream. A drunken rivalry. The peace was shattered by a hiccup. Ryan stumbled into the light, his eyes droopy with inebriation, but burning with a familiar resentment. The chosen one and his new harlot, he slurred, swaying on his feet. He reached out a slimy hand to jerk Nima away from Khan. Won't even fight the resistance, no alpha of mine. It happened in a heartbeat. Khan's fist swung like a hammer, crashing into Ryan's jaw. He launched Nima to the safety of the sidelines as he shifted into his mid-form for sprouting, muscles bulging, a terrifying half-beast. He pounced on his brother, his canines digging deep into the tender skin of Ryan's shoulder. It took half an hour for the elders to pull Khan away. When he finally calmed, he retreated to a corner of the field, securing Nima firmly in his lap. His frame vibrated with a primal rage that sizzled through their bond, but as Nima stroked his arm and murmured soft assurances, the anger began to transmute into something else. The soft pads of her fingers, intended to calm him, began to arouse him. The desire was potent, a thick thrumming that neither could ignore under the silver rays of the moon. The breaking point. Khan carried a drowsy Nima back to their room. He took a cold shower, trying to numb his shot nerves, but the sight of her waiting in bed, half-clothed and soft from sleep, erased his resolve. He climbed in beside her, his skin burning against hers. His lips met hers in a desperate, hungry kiss, tasting of cinnamon and peppermint. He rolled her beneath him, his heavy form merging with hers. For a moment, Nima was swept up in the haze of heat and the undeniable pull of the mate bond. But then, the clarity of the past month hit her like ice water. Khan, stop, she cried out, her hands pushing against his chest. Please, I don't want this. Khan froze. His iridescent gaze flickered with shock before he scrambled off her as if she were acid. He stood by the window, his face a mask of fury and frustration. The scent of her arousal still hung in the air, a cruel taunt to his senses. I can't. It's too soon. I'm just not ready, Nima whispered, her voice pleading. Khan didn't look at her. He knew if he saw her face, he would lose control. Not mad, he managed to groan, his voice slurred with the effort of restraint. Can't stay. He slammed the door behind him, leaving Nima alone in the flickering glow of the fireplace. She felt a hollow ache of guilt. She had wanted him. Her body had screamed for him, but her mind was not yet ready to surrender. They were moving in the right direction, traveling a road toward improvement, but the scars were still deep. Nima looked at her stomach, thinking of the life growing inside her. She hadn't told him. She didn't trust him yet. Until she did, she could not give him her soul, no matter how much the moon's dance demanded it. Chapter 29. The wolves returned from their hunt a week later, trailing a grim procession in their wake. Hundreds of humans, men, women, and children were herded into the same courtyard where Nima's nightmare had begun. The air in the compound grew thick with the scent of fear and the copper tang of fresh blood. Forced matings, official and unofficial challenges, and the crack of the whip returned to the daily rhythm. Emmeline spent her days in the infirmary, her hands stained with the blood of 30 new arrivals whose wounds went far deeper than the lashes on their backs. Nima watched from the sidelines, her navy blue jumpsuit a constant reminder of her status. Though her bond with Khan had blossomed into a strange, unconventional friendship, the political divide between them was a chasm. To Khan, the system worked, the whipping post had, after all, given him his mate. To Nima, it was a cycle of cruelty that humans were forced to endure in silence. But she had no time to change the world. She was running out of time to find her own. With Khan's alpha ceremony only days away, the relocation loomed. Once they moved, the archives would be closed to her forever. Finding Laura. The library was a mess of scattered papers and frayed nerves. Nothing. There's nothing here. Nima screamed, throwing a stack of documents across the room. She was drowning in the records of the deceased and the mated, but her sister Laura remained a ghost. It's okay, Nima. We aren't done yet, Sahina soothed, petting Nima's hair as the hormones of pregnancy threatened to pull her into a pit of despair. Minutes later, a shout broke the tension. I think I found something. Sahina cried. Me as well. Carson added, his fingers flying across his transparent comms device. He bypassed the regional firewalls with a cocky wink, extending the holographic screen. The first video was a year old, a checkpoint in Sunderland. There she was, Laura. She looked skinny and bedraggled, but her golden curls were unmistakable. Nima's breath hitched. But it was the second video, dated only 5 days ago in Wales, that brought Nima to her knees. Laura looked radiant. She had gained healthy weight and was smiling at someone off camera, holding an auburn-haired child in her arms. The text on the screen didn't just list her name, it listed a title, Laura Nyko, mate of Alpha Farron. He mated her in a private ceremony 5 months ago, Sahina explained, a grin spreading across her face. He basically said fuck it to the Brethren's rules. He protected her. Relief washed over Nima. Her sister hadn't been broken. She had found peace, perhaps even love, in the arms of a wolf who cared enough to shield her from the public eye. The dark truth of the past. Now that we've found her, Sahina murmured, her voice turning somber, you need to see this. She inserted a disc with a bright red distress label. A holographic projection filled the room. A woman from the early 21st century appeared, her body charred by fire, her scalp missing patches of hair where molten lava from the sky had struck her. The end, it all started over resources, the woman's husky voice whispered. Not enough food, oil, or water. Then it became about race, nationality. Our governments were the biggest terrorists of our century. The video panned out to a montage of global horror. The White House in ruins, Japan submerged by tsunamis triggered by nuclear detonations, and the sky raining fire. Humans were shown trampling each other to reach underground bunkers, killing their own kind for a spot in the dark. The death toll scrolled across the screen in white numbers that became too large to comprehend. Billions. I can't believe it, Nima sobbed. The history she had been taught, that the wolves had descended and destroyed human civilization, was a lie. Humans had scorched the earth themselves through greed and hatred. The werewolves hadn't ended the world, they had simply walked out of the shadows to claim the ashes that remained. They had built the new world among the ruins of the old so that humanity would never forget its failure. But humanity had forgotten. They had replaced their own guilt with a dark fairy tale about monsters, never realizing the true monsters had been looking at them from the mirror. Chapter 30. The video of the fall burned in Nima's mind, a flickering reel of ash and molten regret. She couldn't sleep. The realization that humanity had been the architect of its own extinction left her twitchy and desperate for a clarity that only one person could provide. She slipped out of bed, disentangling herself from Calum and Jana, and padded into Khan's room. He was sprawled across the bed, half-naked and peaceful, until his voice broke the silence. "You make too much noise." Nima's heart hammered against her ribs. Khan sat up, his sultry hazel eyes tracking her movement as he beckoned her over. "Come here." There was no force this time, only a magnetic, cocky invitation. Nima crawled onto the mattress, stopping inches away, but Khan wasn't satisfied with the distance. He gripped her hips and pulled her legs around his waist, bringing her center flush against his. The heat radiating from his chest was a physical weight. I wanted to talk to you," Nima gasped, her resolve melting as Khan began to move his hips in a slow, agonizing rhythm. "Speak," he vibrated, his eyes darkening as he focused on her. Nima tried to hold on to her thoughts, but the pleasure was a rising tide. I found my sister," she moaned, her hands clenching his shoulders as she rocked against him. The addiction to the bond took over, pushing everything else to the periphery. As she collapsed against his chest, lethargic and spent, she finally managed to whisper the name. "Lara. She's in Wales." Mated to an alpha called Farron. Khan's body stiffened, a flicker of shock crossing his face. Farron is a respected alpha. He is royalty of a sort. The regret of the wolves. Nima pulled back slightly, her voice returning to her. "I saw the disc, Khan. The end times. I want to know, how did you become the leaders? Why didn't you stop it?" Khan's face twisted into a scowl of ancient guilt. Humans caused the demise, and we were idle. Before the world ended, we were crazy cults living off-grid. We saw you destroying yourselves, but we sat back. When the nuclear flares went off, we knew we had messed up. It is the Wolfen Brethren's biggest regret. He explained the hard truth. The werewolves had rebuilt the world from the rubble, intending to leave the sewage dwellers to their fate. But the radiation had warped the wolves' genetics, their birth rates plummeted, and they could no longer find mates among their own kind. "We brought you back into the fold because we had to," he admitted. "Maybe it was nature's way of merging us. But your kind was resistant. You spent centuries rotting the young's minds with lies about us." "And the Wolfen Brethren?" Nima asked. "The original 12 families who built the laws. Only 50 families can trace their ancestry to them. My family is one." Nima gasped in mock horror. "So I'm mated to royalty? A little sewage dweller like me? I'm so damn lucky." The tension broke into laughter, a genuine, shared moment that felt like a cornerstone for something new. Nima realized that knowing the truth, knowing that the wolves weren't just random monsters, allowed her to finally consider trusting him. "I just want to be worthy of that trust," Khan pleaded, his voice thick with a desperation she had never heard. "I am trying." "I can see that," she whispered, covering his lips in a sweet, lingering kiss. The shadow of the past. The next morning, Khan walked the corridors with a rare sense of optimism. The violence of their first month felt miles away. Nima was beginning to bask him in her love, and he was determined to secure her trust with something big, something regarding her family. But as he neared his office, the scent of cinnamon and musk filled the air. "It has been a while since you spent time with me, Khan," a melodic voice called out. The red-headed woman from the celebration, one of his potential mates, stepped into his path. Her green eyes twinkled with a mock annoyance that held a sharp edge. "Avoiding you? I have been with my mate, Khan responded, his voice deepening despite himself. The biological connection to a potential mate was a weak signal compared to Nima's, but it was still a hum in his blood. Before or after you lie in my bed, she questioned, her voice dripping with satisfied sarcasm. Khan stopped cold. The ghost of his life before Nima and the secrets he had kept stood right in front of him. Chapter 31. The morning air felt lighter, the usual compound gloom replaced by a lingering sense of hope. Nima moved through her routine with a rejuvenated spirit, the memory of Khan's arms around her from the night before acting as a shield against the world outside. For the first time, she could see a future, a real one, where they weren't just a predator and his prey, but a family. All right, guys, we are sticking to the normal plan, Nima told her siblings, her eyes bright. Jana, her pigtails a mess of golden curls, shouted a muffled "OH" through a thumb in her mouth. She was thrilled by the influx of strangers, wolves and humans from across the regions arriving for the ceremony. Calum, however, had a more specific concern. Can we see Khan before nursery? He never said morning. Nima checked the clock. They were early. All right, she agreed, wanting that same reassurance. She needed to see him, to make sure the tenderness of the night before hadn't been a mirage. The office encounter. They found Khan behind his desk, his face softening instantly as Calum and Jana scrambled into his lap. He looked like a different man, happy, patient, and good to them. A stocky wolf, Nima recognized from her trial, bowed to her with newfound respect before leaving with signed papers. Nima leaned over the desk to give Khan a quick kiss. As she did, a scent hit her. It was subtle, mint and cinnamon, clinging to his shoulder as if someone had brushed against him recently. You smell different, she noted, her nose scrunching. Khan jerked back slightly, his eyes flaring. He sniffed his own clothes and gave a grunt. Without a word, he pulled Nima into a tight embrace, rubbing his chest against hers until their scents were thoroughly mingled. Now I smell like you, he murmured into her neck. You, the kids squealed, making sick motions. Nima laughed, patting Khan's shoulder as she ushered the children out. The interaction left her glowing, confident that their bond was solid. The red-headed shadow. After dropping the kids at the nursery, Nima sat down to wait for Emmeline. A shadow fell over her and she turned, expecting a friend. Instead, she was met by the cold, green gaze of the redhead from the celebration. You're Nima, right? I'm Leslie, the woman drawled, her voice thick with condescension. She didn't offer a hand. She simply looked Nima up and down like she was something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. I just wanted to let you know, before word got out, Leslie said, a sickening smile stretching across her face as she rubbed her flat stomach, that I am pregnant with Khan's baby. The world seemed to tilt. Nima's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let her mask slip. I'm supposed to believe he got the likes of you pregnant, she snorted, forcing a laugh. As if. He came to my bed one night, aroused and angry, Leslie taunted, her eyes gleaming with malice. He didn't leave until morning light. You don't have to believe me, but Khan does. Your time as his mate has expired. The scent of cinnamon and musk, the same scent Nima had caught in the office, flared in her memory. A cold dread began to pool in her stomach, but she refused to give Leslie the satisfaction of seeing her break. Maybe he does, Nima countered, her voice dropping to a dangerous leer. But your place and your pup will never surpass me. If you think a baby will keep him, you're dumber than I thought. If you are pregnant, Khan will claim the pup, but it'll be me that child calls mummy. It was a bluff, a cruel one, but it worked. Leslie stormed out, her face twisted in rage. The growing niggle. What was that about? Emmeline asked, hurrying over as she saw Leslie's dramatic exit. Oh, you know, the usual, Nima replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Just some heifer claiming your mate impregnated her. Nothing much. They both laughed, a high, strained sound that didn't reach their eyes. Nima leaned back against the seat, her hands subconsciously resting on her own stomach. She had wanted to believe in Khan's change of heart. She had wanted to trust the man who held her so tenderly last night. But the seed of doubt had been planted. And in the fertile soil of Nima's fraying trust, it was already starting to grow. Chapter 32. The seed Leslie planted didn't just grow, it festered into a black rot that consumed Nima's every thought. By the time she cornered Con in the private garden, the vibrant blues and pinks of the flowers felt like a mockery. Con looked like a man unraveling. His hair was unbound and wild, his eyes bloodshot, and his body twitched with a restless, frantic energy. The moment Nima saw him, she knew. She didn't need the words. She could see the guilt etched into the very lines of his face. "Where were you?" she husked, her voice a jagged shard of glass. "What are you talking about?" Con paced, his hands clawing through his hair. "Leslie told me, Con. So I'm going to ask you again. Where were you?" Her brown eyes, once softening toward him, were now cold enough to freeze the blood in his veins. "She is not my mate," Con bellowed, his voice shaking the garden walls. Spittle flew from his lips as he raged, desperate to bridge the chasm opening between them. "She could be," Nima bit back, her voice cracking. "So that's where you went? You couldn't get what you wanted from me, so you jumped on the next wanton wolf with her legs spread wide? Congratulations. I hope the air was worth it. You're mine." Con roared, lunging forward to cup her face in his massive hands. "Always, Nima. Always." "I'm not, Con," she sobbed, pulling away from his touch. "I sacrificed my freedom, my pride, and my dignity for you. But you couldn't even wait for me. For that, I will never be yours. The point of no return." Con dropped to his knees, a broken king at the feet of a human girl. He buried his face against her stomach, his tears dampening her navy jumpsuit. "It's lies, Nima. Fucking lies. Then why did you smell like her this morning? Answer me." She struck his chest with her fist, demanding a truth he seemed unable to articulate. Before he could respond, the shaved-headed warrior appeared at the garden gate, his face pale and urgent. "Alpha. No. Fuck," Con bellowed, climbing to his feet. He looked torn in two. "I don't have time to explain, I have to go, but I swear it's lies." "You leave now, Con, and we are done," Nima shouted. "Do you hear me? Done." Con spun around, running back to her one last time, gripping her face with a desperation that bordered on madness. "Please, Nima. Just trust me." "Trust you?" She laughed through her tears, slapping his hands away as if his touch were a contagion. Every time she looked at him, she saw him between Leslie's thighs, then coming back to her bed with the same hands, the same mouth. The thought turned her stomach. She doubled over, the contents of her stomach hitting the dirt near his boots. The physical manifestation of her disgust hung in the air, bitter and acidic. "Nima," he reached out, his own eyes rimmed with red. "Just go," she pleaded, her voice a hollow shell. "Just go, Con." He stood there for a moment, his frame shaking with silent, ragged sobs as he watched his mate crumble. "Fuck," he wept. "Okay, I'll go. But this isn't done." He marched away, his back straight, leaving Nima alone in the dirt. She wiped her mouth with her sleeve, the weight of her secret pregnancy now a crushing burden. He was poison. No matter how much the flowers bloomed or the moon danced, there was no middle ground for a wolf who couldn't stay true. Chapter 33. Dinner was a battlefield where no blood was shed, but every nerve was frayed. Nima sat between a silent, pleading Con and a smug, preening Leslie. The red-headed wolf had managed to secure a seat further up the table, her eyes constantly darting toward Con while her hands clung to Ryan. Nima's right eye twitched with a rhythmic, maddening pulse. She was trapped in a performance, pretending to care for the man beside her just to deny Leslie a victory. Under the table, Con's calloused hand found hers, his fingers squeezing in a silent plea for an explanation. Nima didn't give him an inch. Her nails bit into his skin until she could smell the faint metallic tang of his blood in the air. She was volatile, hungry, and dangerously close to losing her composure. To distract herself from the urge to sink a fork into Leslie's head, she scanned the guests. Across the table sat a magnificent male with icy blue eyes and long dreadlocks woven with a golden ribbon. On his hand glistened a ring with a familiar pattern, a family crest that felt like a ghost from her past. Before she could place it, the hall doors swung open. A sweet, melodic voice drifted through the room. "Sorry, I'm late, guys." The pups were restless. Nima's head snapped up. There, standing at the entrance, was a woman with golden curls and a familiar grace. Nima didn't think. She was out of her chair and around the table before anyone could blink. "Nima," the woman whispered, her small fingers flying to her face. "Lara," Nima sobbed, gathering her sister into her arms. The rest of the world, the compound, the council, the betrayal, ceased to exist. The kindred spirits were whole again. The Pegasus ring. Hours later, the two sisters were huddled together in Lara's guest room. The children, Calum, Jana, and Lara's 3 adopted daughters, were a pile of tangled limbs and soft snores across the bed. "Is that hunky man your mate?" Nima giggled, the first genuine laughter she'd felt in days. "Yes, that's Farron," Lara smiled, her eyes glowing with a peace Nima envied. She explained how Khan had sent his men to track her down and bring her back, a gesture that softened Nima's heart for a fleeting second before the memory of Leslie returned. Lara reached out, and the light caught her ring. It was inscribed with a Pegasus. A winged horse. "It was Dad's," Nima whispered. "It's our family crest now," Lara replied softly. "Farron wears it to show his kinship to all of us. It means wisdom, fame and knowledge, and being humble to the gods. It's a sign that you, Calum, and Jana have a home with us, too." Lara's story of her escape was harrowing. She had been hunted for sport by men in her previous compound, only to be rescued by Farron and his pack. He had carried her away, protecting her even when she screamed to go back for her siblings. "I wanted to punish him for not listening," Lara admitted, "but he just wanted me safe." Doubled joy, doubled pain. As they sat in the quiet of the early morning, Lara's face took on a radiant sheen. "These hormones are getting the better of me," she chuckled, patting her stomach. Nima's jaw dropped. "You're pregnant." "I am." Lara beamed, her excitement lighting up the room. "We can raise our children as best friends, Nima." Nima's lip wobbled. The joy she should have felt was overshadowed by the wreckage of her relationship with Khan. "So am I," she whispered, her voice cracking. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Lara saw the red, swollen eyes and the runny mess of Nima's face. For the next hour, Nima poured out everything: the trial, the whipping post, the library, the video of the fall, and finally, Leslie's claim. By the time Nima finished, Lara was shaking with a cold, protective fury. Her nostrils flared, and her hands clenched the bedsheets. Her little sister had been surviving a nightmare while she had been living a dream. "Right," Lara said, her voice dropping into a low, commanding tone as she censored her language for the sleeping children. "Nima, this is what you are going to tell that no-good piece of crap." Chapter 34. Nima didn't knock. She stormed into Khan's room the next morning with a heavy, leather-bound book in her hand and a swagger that felt like armor. Lara's words had been the flint. Nima was the flame. Khan was a wreck. He sat up in bed, his hair a knotted mess, with deep bags under his eyes. He looked like death, and Nima savored it. She marched to the window and yanked the curtains open, letting the sharp morning sun strike him like a blow. "I've come to a conclusion about our situation, Khan," she began, her voice steady and cold. "Sit up. You'll want to pay attention to the law." Khan leaned against the headboard, his bare chest heaving as he watched her. Nima flipped the book open to a dog-eared page. Page 349, Law 122, Section 5, under the creed of the Wolf and Brethren, she read aloud. "If a mated wolf impregnates a female who is not his intended mate, said mate can annul the bond and can mate with another male." "I am said mate, Khan. In case you forgot." Khan's expression shifted from exhaustion to pure, unadulterated rage. "I'm breaking it down for you," she taunted. "When I give birth to your child, I am going to annul our mating. It is my right. And then I'll find a new mate and give him a room full of babies." Khan was out of bed in a flash, his frame vibrating with the struggle to keep his wolf from surfacing. He lunged, pinning her against the wall, his nose inches from hers. "You're mine. No man will give you pups but me." Section 8, Nima countered, her eyebrows arched in a lethal challenge. A female can raise her pup without her mate if an annulment takes place. She doesn't have to remate until the child is 6. "I'm 22, Khan. I don't mind waiting until I'm 28 to find a man who actually knows how to be faithful." Khan roared and forced his mouth to hers, a desperate, punishing kiss meant to reclaim her. Nima felt the familiar pull of the bond, the addictive heat of him, but she remembered the scent of cinnamon on his skin. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the wolfsbane-tainted blade, and gave his shoulder a sharp, shallow nick. He hissed, releasing her to stare at the blood on his chest. Nima smoothed her clothes, moving toward the door. "Now that we have that sorted, you should really mark Leslie," she said over her shoulder. "People are bound to think she's not yours. And get that wound checked. We don't want a repeat of the infection." She walked out, leaving him standing in the wreckage of his own bedroom. The training ground trials. Nima spent the rest of the day in a bubble of sisters and children. She and Lara sat on the mats in the training hall, watching Calum play fight with Carson. Jana and Lara's youngest, Ellie, was curled up in their laps, napping in a rare moment of peace. "So he didn't even react to the pregnancy?" Lara asked, her voice hushed. It went over his head, Nima sighed. "He was too busy claiming I was his property. The reality hasn't sunk in yet. When it does, it'll be a war." Lara nodded grimly. "Alpha possessiveness is scary. If I even mentioned another male, Farron would go crazy." "Why would Farron go crazy?" A deep voice rumbled above them. Farron stood there, his massive arms folded. Lara skillfully dodged the question as he explained why the room was so crowded. "There's a fighting competition. The top 10 fighters earn a place in Khan's new pack in the north. It's an honor." Nima looked around. This was the first she'd heard of it, another reminder that she was a mate in name only. Farron led them to the front row seats, picking up the sleeping children with ease. Nathaniel, Khan's father, stepped onto the central mat, followed by 20 warriors. Their chests were bare, their eyes hungry for the status of the new regional Alpha's guard. Today, Nathaniel's voice boomed, "These men fight for their place. They will fight until only 10 stand victorious." Nima scanned the room for Khan. She knew he would be there soon, judging the men who would protect his compound and his mate. She felt the blade in her pocket and the life in her womb. The competition on the mat was about to begin, but Nima knew the real fight was happening right in the front row. Chapter 35. Nima sat stiffly beside Alpha Nathaniel as the fighting trials reached their climax. 5 matches had passed, and there was still no sign of Khan or Leslie. The thought of them together, perhaps finalizing the details of their new family, twisted in her gut. He's sorting out last-minute details before the move. "He will be here for the final fight," Nathaniel said, leaning slightly toward her. His voice was gravelly but not unkind. Nima was startled that he'd read her thoughts so easily, but she offered a small nod of thanks. As the matches continued, Calum's excitement provided a sharp contrast to Nima's dread. He was up on his chair, cheering and booing with the ferocity of a seasoned warrior, until Nathaniel's stern hand caught him before he could topple over. Then, the final match was called. Carson stepped onto the mat, and the room fell into a weighted silence. He looked nothing like the boy Nima had first met in the infirmary. His chest was broad, his golden hair tightly braided, and his face set in a mask of grim determination. He was fighting for more than a spot in the pack. He was fighting for the respect he had been denied his entire life. The underestimated son. The fight was brutal. Carson's opponent was a mountain of a man, but Carson was a storm. He used his speed to weave through massive blows, his fists finding the warrior's nose with a sickening crunch. For a moment, it looked like Carson would be overwhelmed as the warrior landed a heavy kick that sent him reeling, but he absorbed the impact, using the momentum for a final, desperate counterattack. He locked his arm around the man's neck, utilizing the very move Nima had taught him. With a roar, he slammed the warrior into the mat. The bell rang. The crowd erupted into a frenzy of howls and cheers. Nathaniel walked onto the mat, his pride glowing like a beacon as he clapped his son on the back. "Well done, my boy." Nima felt a heavy presence settle into the chair beside her. The scent of musk and blood preceded him. Con. He didn't look at her, he didn't plead. He remained stoic, his coldness a sharp blade that cut deeper than his previous anger. It was as if he had already moved on, and the bitterness that surged through Nima threatened to choke her. Khan rose, his voice booming as he addressed the 10 victors, 6 males and 4 females, welcoming them into the new pack. A warning from the father. After the crowds began to thin, Nathaniel pulled Nima aside. "I would like to thank you," he said, his voice low, "for what you have done for both my sons." He spoke of Carson, his little miracle born when he was 300 years old. He admitted to coddling him, thinking him weak, and thanked Nima for helping the boy find his fire. But then his expression darkened, becoming shuddered. "I have to warn you, Nima. Khan has something planned, and I cannot stop him. It is his right as your alpha until the ceremony tomorrow." Nima's breath hitched. "What is it?" "He wants you to go to the punishment docks, Nima. He has ordered you there." The world turned to ice. The punishment docks, the place of the whipping post. The place where the air smelled of salt and bubbling blood. Her trauma resurfaced with the force of a tidal wave. She could almost feel the phantom sting of the lash on her back. "He wants to punish me," she whispered, her eyes blurring with a red haze of fury and fear. "After everything?" "He says it is his right," Nathaniel replied, looking as if the words pained him. Nima's fear didn't last long. It was quickly consumed by a white-hot rage. If Khan thought he could drag her back to that place, the place that had almost broken her, to assert his dominance, he was mistaken. She wasn't a mouse to be hunted. She was a fox with a blade. "He thinks to frighten me into submission," she spat, her hands trembling. "He thinks he can force me to be his mate through fear." She turned to see Carson and Emmeline approaching. "He wants to take me to the docks," she told them, her voice shaking. "He wants to what?" Carson's eyes went wide. "You stabbed him again, didn't you?" Emmeline groaned, though her eyes were full of worry. "It was a scratch." Nima snapped, her cheeks reddening. "But if he wants a performance at the docks, I'll give him one. He's forgotten who I am. I think it's time I reminded him." Chapter 36. Nima strode toward the punishing post not as a victim, but as a queen. The rhythmic thumping of the drums sang to her soul, clearing the fog of jealousy. She knew, with a sudden, bone-deep clarity, that the silver poles were not for her tonight. A crowd of silent wolves parted as she approached. Standing by the podium was the wiry, white-haired male who had whipped her weeks ago. Beside him stood Khan, his chest bare, his expression stoic. But as Nima drew closer, she saw the mirth in his eyes. "This woman," the white-haired elder announced, his voice a chilling baritone, tried to claim our alpha's seed for a child she never carried. A ruse to lure him into her grasp. For that, she will receive 30 lashes laced with wolfsbane and banishment from all packs. Leslie was dragged onto the stage, screaming like a banshee, her red hair wild as she fought the guards. "I am your mate," she shrieked, frothing at the mouth. "I had his baby first." Nima watched, stone-faced, as the guards strapped Leslie to the post. The first crack of the whip echoed through the courtyard, followed by a blood-curdling scream. The smell of torn flesh and iron filled the air. Khan watched Nima's reaction closely. This was a test of her strength as a Luna. If she vomited or turned away, the pack would deem her weak. Nima bit her lip until it bled, staring back at Khan with a gaze of pure ice, refusing to give the crowd the satisfaction of her collapse. When the 30 lashes were done, and the brand of the traitor had sizzled into Leslie's skin, the woman was dragged away, unconscious. The crowd dispersed, leaving only Nima and Khan in the moonlit courtyard. The bitter truth. "You just gonna have me standing in the cold all day?" Nima snapped, her hands on her hips. Khan jumped from the podium, his landing heavy. He walked toward her with a smug, lazy pace. "You owe me an apology for trying to leave me," he said. Your pup is the only one I am having. And how do you know that? She challenged. We cannot impregnate 2 females at once, he stated clinically. Only one can carry my mark. The mystery of the baby was solved, but the betrayal remained. You still cheated, Khan. You let me believe you slept with her. You let her scent stay on you. I didn't sleep with her, Nima, Khan said, his teeth flashing in a sudden, arrogant grin. I knew there was something off about her scent. I played along to figure out why she was here, but I never touched her. You played along? Nima's voice rose to a screech. You let me mourn our relationship. You let me hate you, just so you could play detective? She began slapping at his chest, her nails catching his lip and drawing blood. Khan simply laughed, ducking a stone she threw at his head. I admit I was stupid to go to her room, he said, his voice softening. I value us, Nima. I'm sorry. The antidote. Nima's frame rocked with sobs. His apology was sincere, but it felt like a bandage on a limb that had already been severed. I never asked for your love, Khan. Just loyalty and respect. I couldn't even get that. She looked at him, the man who had caused her more pain in 2 months than she had felt in 22 years. He was poison in her bloodstream, and no matter how much he whispered comfort, there was no antidote. No, Nima. Please, Khan pleaded, stepping toward her as he saw the finality in her eyes. Don't, she warned, backing away. I'm done, Khan. I'm so done. She turned and fled the courtyard, her hair whipping behind her as she ran from the man who was her mate, her tormentor, and the father of her child. Khan's voice called her name, echoing against the stone walls of the compound, but she didn't look back. Chapter 37. Khan sat alone in the dim light of the main hall, a glass of wine held loosely in his hand. The liquid was dark and heavy, much like the thoughts swirling in his mind. Nima's words, her promise of annulment, stung more than any blade she had ever wielded against him. He knew he had ruined it. From the moment he hid her siblings to the night he had lost control and scarred her, he had been his own worst enemy. But the baby changed everything. That child was a piece of her he would always have, a living tether that ensured they would never truly be apart. Nima had changed him. She had turned a cold fighter into a man who could actually feel the weight of love. She had even bridged the gap between him and Carson. The heavy creak of the hall doors broke his reverie. Khan didn't turn. He simply set his glass down on the marble table with a deliberate clack. I've been waiting for you, he grumbled. Behind him, Ryan Manasseh froze. The eldest son of Alpha Nathaniel stood stock-still, his beady eyes darting around the shadows of the hall. He looked frantic, the stench of fear rolling off him in waves. Khan? What are you doing here? Ryan's voice quivered. You know why I'm here, Khan replied, finally turning his predatory gaze on his older brother. Khan noted the time on the wall, 3 p.m. Dinner wasn't for hours. Ryan was early, uncharacteristically nervous, and carrying a leather pouch at his belt that he was trying very hard to hide. The firstborn's greed. Was the money not enough, Ryan? Khan growled, rising slowly from his seat. We share the same blood. How could you betray me like this? Ryan stumbled over a weak excuse about being early for dinner, but the sweat trickling down his mahogany skin told the real story. He was a weak man, a man who had withered under the shadow of his younger brother's strength. Ryan had been a good brother once, but resentment had rotted his soul. What is in the pouch? Khan asked, nodding toward the belt. Ryan's face contorted. In a moment of sheer desperation, he turned to flee. He didn't make it 3 steps. Khan was a blur of motion, the chair he had been sitting in shattering against the wall as he launched himself forward. He caught Ryan by the throat, slamming him into a chair at the table. Tell me. Khan roared, his fist splintering the wood of the tabletop. Ryan collapsed into himself, sobbing into his hands. For a second, Khan felt a flicker of pity, until the sobbing turned into a jagged, sinister laugh. Ryan looked up, his face a mask of villainy. How could you fall for it? Ryan heckled, his eyes gleaming with ridicule. She was just a distraction, Khan. Leslie was meant to lure you into her bed, so I could turn your precious Nima against you. The bitch got greedy, but it worked, didn't it? Ryan leaned forward, his voice a venomous hiss. I was going to poison your drink tonight. Let you die in front of our father. You're a coward, Con. You let a human female take your pride. You stopped the hunts. You're soft. A different path. Con felt a headache brewing. Ryan's ranting was incessant, a desperate attempt to justify a failed coup. When Ryan pulled a silver dagger from his sheath, Con didn't even flinch. With a flick of his wrist, he disarmed his brother, the sound of Ryan's finger bones cracking echoing in the hall. Don't wave that in my face, Con murmured. It's impolite. He called in the sentinels, bulky, trained wolves who specialized in high-level arrests. As Con turned to walk away, a searing pain erupted in his shoulder blade. Ryan had thrown a second hidden knife. Con didn't shout. He reached back, pulled the blade from his flesh, and spun. With a calculated throw, he sent the bloody knife cartwheeled through the air. It found its mark, pinning Ryan's broken hand to the table. Ryan's screams filled the hall. Con sauntered back, leaning down to whisper into his brother's ear. According to the laws of the Wolfen Brethren, Con had every right to kill him. He wanted to. His wolf screamed for the kill. But then he thought of Nima. He thought of her devotion to her siblings and her unwavering loyalty to family. If he killed his own brother, he would become the monster she already feared he was. The things I do for this woman, Con grumbled to himself. He stood up, leaving Ryan to the sentinels. Ryan would be punished, stripped of his status, and put to work, but he would live. Con walked out of the hall, the bitter taste of betrayal still in his mouth, but for the first time in his life, he had chosen mercy over blood. Chapter 38. Nima had retreated to the one place that shouldn't have felt like home, Con's bed. She lay curled on the mattress, the scent of mint and wood smoke anchoring her errant thoughts. She was wrestling with the impossible math of their bond. He hadn't actually slept with Leslie, but he had invited the possibility into his room. He had broken the fragile trust she was just beginning to grow. The door burst open. Con stumbled in, his left shoulder saturated with blood and his face a mask of total exhaustion. He collapsed onto the bed beside her, his breathing shallow. Nima checked the wound. It was reknitting already, and there wasn't enough damage to justify the amount of blood on his shirt. Con, are you okay? She whispered. He grunted, turning his head to rest against her knee. Ryan hates me, he murmured, his voice a lazy, tired lilt. But that's okay. I have you. Don't I? He didn't wait for an answer before drifting into a deep, dreamless sleep. Nima stayed. She lay beside him, her fingers tracing the curls at his nape, watching the orange morning light turn his skin to gold. For 12 hours, the world outside, the move, the ceremony, the betrayal, stood still. Maternal bonds and sisterly friction. The next morning, a soft knock on the door brought Nima back to reality. It was Lara, dressed in pale blue, looking every bit the nurturing mother she had always been. Jana keeps asking for her mama, Lara whispered, her bottom lip tucked between her teeth. There was a flicker of hurt in her eyes. It's not right, Nima. You're her sister, not her mother. Nima felt the sting of the accusation. Jana needed a mother, and I was all she had. Farron's children call you mother, and no one complains. I won't feel bad for providing the love they were missing, Lara. The tension hung in the air, a reminder of the year they had spent apart. Nima closed the door, the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her. She took a quick, hot shower, trying to wash away the confusion. When she emerged, Con was awake. He didn't waste time. He crossed the room, lifted her off her feet, and kissed her with a desperate, crushing hunger. For a moment, Nima let herself be swept away. Until the reality of his arousal reminded her of the bed he'd shared with Leslie. She bit his lip hard, drawing blood. Put me down, Con. The new terms. Am I not allowed to kiss my mate? Con grumbled as he set her down. Everything I said remains the same, Nima snapped, throwing her hands on her hips. And I'm not your flipping mate. The argument escalated quickly. Con tried to throw her lack of trust back in her face, reminding her that she'd hidden the pregnancy. I had every right not to trust you, she screamed. 5 seconds into our mating, and you were trying to kill me. How does that inspire trust? Khan's shoulders slumped. The fire in him died out, replaced by a raw, naked pleading. He dropped to his knees, burying his face against her stomach. I'm trying, Nima. I love the way you challenge me. I'm hopeless without you. Please, can we just start fresh? Nima looked down at the powerful alpha groveling at her feet. The cycle of violence, the lies, the potential mates, it had to stop. No, she said firmly. Khan froze, his soul seemingly crushed under the weight of that one word. But she wasn't finished. I won't forget the pain you caused. You aren't entitled to my forgiveness. You have to work for it. You have to earn my trust. She stepped back, her voice level and cold. Until then, I am only the mother of your child. You need to prove your worth, because I'm not doing this cycle of hurting each other anymore. Khan didn't move for a long time. Then he leaned forward, pressing his forehead against her stomach again. This time, his tears dampened her skin. She hadn't said yes, but she hadn't left. She had given him a path to redemption, a chance to be the man he claimed he wanted to be. He would show her. He would become worthy of the family she was building, even if he had to spend every day of the next 6 years earning his place back in her heart. Chapter 39. Nima stood on the stage, the heavy scent of gold and black ink thick in the air. For hours, she had watched the elderly artist work on Khan's skin, his frail hands moving with a precision that bordered on the divine. Khan sat nearly motionless on a stool, his loose hair adorned with small gold beads that Nima and Jana had woven in earlier that morning. This was the marking, the sacred transfer of power. Every swirling line, every intricate dot, represented a life Khan was now sworn to protect. While his father's marks were a balanced blend of gold and black, Khan's were a deep, midnight black, with gold serving only as a sharp, flickering accent. It was a visual testament to his intensity. Doesn't he look fearsome? Nora, Khan's youngest sister, whispered with a giggle. She was the image of her brother, though her eyes were a bright, cheerful green. Beside her, the eldest sister, Era, stood tall and elegant, watching the process with a quiet, elven grace. Khan's eyes never left Nima's. Through the hours of harsh needles and stinging ink, she was his anchor. He had insisted she and their unborn child be present, believing their energy would bless his rule. The oil and the oath. When the artist finally set down his needles, the stage was cleared of the stool and ink. The elderly man handed Nima a jar of shimmering yellow healing oil. Following his silent gesture, Nima stepped forward. Her breath caught as she rubbed the cool liquid over Khan's burning skin. His chest heaved under her touch, his sensitive marks reacting to her proximity. It was an intimate, public display that left Nima's cheeks flushed, but she didn't pull away. It is time, Alpha Nathaniel announced, his voice thick with a mix of pride and uncertainty. The dividers, the heavy sheets that had hidden them from the masses, were suddenly yanked down. The drums reached a deafening crescendo, a steady, primal thrum that vibrated in Nima's bones. Thousands of wolves waited below, their eyes fixed on their new leader. Nima moved to step off the stage, but Khan's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against his side. Stay, he husked. A new decree. Khan stepped to the edge of the stage, his bared chest gleaming with the fresh, dark ink of his station. He raised his free hand, and the roaring crowd fell into a hushed, expectant silence. I, Khan Manasseh, son of Nathaniel, descendant of the Wolfen brethren, he began, his voice booming across the courtyard, alongside my mate, Nima, accept this title bestowed upon us. The shock hit Nima like a physical weight. By including her in the acceptance, he wasn't just claiming her as a consort, he was elevating her. In a society where humans were often viewed as lesser, Khan was publicly declaring that they would lead as one. The silence lasted only a heartbeat before the crowd erupted. Howls, barks, and cheers shook the very foundation of the stage. The people saw a fearsome alpha, but Nima saw the man who had surrendered his ego to his conscience. She was not a wolf. She was not a warrior, but she was the light that had led him out of the darkness of his own rage. As they stood together overlooking their new kingdom, Nima felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just the bond. It was hope. Epilogue. 10 years later. Boys in a straight line. Fix your shirts, Khan growled, though the edge in his voice was softened by a decade of domesticity. In front of him stood 3 miniature versions of himself, clad in pristine white. Rourke, the eldest at 10, already wore his black hair in a ponytail that mirrored his father's, though his face was currently twisted in a scowl. Why do we have to wear these ugly clothes? He grumbled. Because your mother wants it, Khan sighed. It was the only explanation needed. In the Manasseh household, Nima's word was law, a reality Khan accepted with a smirk and a heart full of devotion. They were gathered in the expansive gardens of the northern compound for a vow renewal. It had been 10 years since their rocky beginning and 5 years since Nima had gifted Khan a gold ring with the insignia of a Pegasus, her final sign of total acceptance. What was meant to be a quiet ceremony had blossomed into a grand celebration, largely because their youngest, 2-year-old Noah, couldn't keep a secret. A family reunited. The procession was a vibrant tapestry of the lives they had built. Jana, now 12, led the way with her younger sister, Raina. They were followed by a brood of red-headed girls, the daughters of Lara and Farron. Lara sat in the front row, glowing and heavily pregnant with her next child, her youngest napping on Farron's lap. Emmeline and Sahina followed, their own families having grown alongside Nima's. The children of the 4 women formed a tight-knit clan, a new generation of wolves and humans who knew nothing of the old prejudices. Even Vanya, now 23 and breathtakingly beautiful, walked the aisle. She was currently taunting her mate, Carson, by leaning into the arm of a broad-shouldered human male. Carson stood by the altar, fists clenched, enduring the same playful torture he had once put Vanya through when she was young. It was a poetic, if agonizing, justice. Then, the drums picked up a new rhythm. Nima appeared, walking on the arm of Calum. At 16, Calum was no longer the frightened boy from the underground. He was a tall, muscular warrior in training who looked at Khan as both a brother and a father. The eternal connection. As Nima reached the altar, Khan felt the air leave his lungs. She was a vision in a lace-crystallized mermaid dress that accentuated the curves of a woman who had birthed 4, soon to be 5, children. Her brown hair cascaded in waves, and her eyes, once filled with survivalist fire, now shone with peace. Later, as they sat together watching their children, the Hellions, as Nima called them, running wild through the garden, she leaned into Khan's neck. I can't believe we're on child number 5, she whispered, her lips brushing his pulse. Khan's knife clattered to the table as he turned to her, his hazel eyes wide. Another one? Nima laughed, pulling him closer. Their journey hadn't been easy. It had taken years to build the trust that now anchored them. There had been the move, the birth of twins Rourke and Raina, and the constant navigation of their different worlds. But they had found something rare. 5 years ago, Nima had fallen ill. The healers discovered that her DNA was shifting, a manifestation of the bond. Because her spiritual connection to Khan was so absolute, her human biology had altered to accommodate a werewolf's lifespan. They wouldn't just have a few decades, they had centuries. The run. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Khan stood, signaling the start of the traditional run. He pecked each of his children and gave Nima a lingering, heated kiss before beginning his transformation. Nima watched with pride as the white tuxedo shredded, replaced by the powerful gray wolf she had grown to love. His hazel eyes, ringed with gold, looked at her one last time before he let out a thunderous howl that was echoed by the entire pack. Run wild, my love, she murmured, stroking his thick fur. I'll be waiting. With a final nudge against her thigh, Khan leapt into the forest, leading his people and his children into the night. Nima stood with her youngest son, Noah, in her arms, surrounded by her mother, Felicity, who they had rescued years ago, and her siblings. She couldn't shift, and she would never have fur or claws, but as she felt Khan's excitement thrumming through their shared life force, she knew she wasn't missing a thing. She had survived the darkness to build a kingdom of light, and for the next 100 years, she intended to enjoy every moment of it. The end.
The ultimate moral lesson of this story is to know that family is the sacred thread that holds us together, and true strength often arrives when we learn to weave new bond from life's unforeseen changes. Now, at our stage of life, having raised children, weathered storms, and carried the quiet weight of responsibility on our shoulders, this story offers something far richer than mere entertainment. It is a tender, unflinching mirror held up to everyone who has ever fought fiercely for those they love. Nima's journey reminds us, with quiet power and deep compassion, that nothing in this world can sever the love we carry for our family. Whether we are shielding young ones from danger or holding space for them through heartache, that maternal fire is our greatest inheritance. Yet the story whispers a profound truth many of us discover only after years of experience. Pure defiance, while noble, is not always the final answer. Nima's raw courage, enduring lashes, terror, and unimaginable humiliation show us the beauty of a woman's unyielding spirit. But it is in her gradual surrender to a destiny she never chose that her deepest transformation begins. The Alpha does not merely claim her. Life itself invites her into a larger purpose. And that, my friends, is the quiet wisdom so many of us have lived. Sometimes the path that feels like captivity is actually the doorway to a stronger, wiser version of ourselves. What everyone would carry from Nima's story. Protect your loved ones with everything you have. Like Nima shielding her little brother and sister through raids and loss, our role as guardians never truly ends. That fierce, protective love is our legacy. Your inner dignity can never be taken. The world may try to strip away comfort, freedom, or pride. Yet the quiet fire within us remains. Nima's refusal to break, even in her most vulnerable moments, is a testament to the resilience we have all cultivated over decades. Graceful acceptance can become your greatest power. There comes a season when fighting every current exhausts us. Learning to move with life's deeper currents, while still honoring our values, often leads to unexpected healing and new strength. This is not a tale of submission, dear ones. It is a celebration of the mature woman's heart, one that has loved deeply, endured bravely, and finally discovered that true power often blooms in the tender space between holding on and letting life reshape us. Close this audiobook with this gentle knowing. Your family, your spirit, and your hard-won wisdom are more powerful than any storm. Nima's journey is our own, a beautiful reminder that even in the darkest chapters, a woman's love can rewrite the ending. You've lived enough to recognize this truth. Now live it boldly, with grace. Yellowheart.